Hello guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. So, today we are gonna see, what if Luffy kills Akainu at Marineford, part 6. So before we start, go check out the author of this fanfic Psychotic Tomato. Subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Let's begin this story. Boy, Hector. Hector respond, damn it. Right now, the command room in the center of the base was in chaos. Many were losing communication with their members left and right rapidly, as many looked pale and horrified about what would happen to them if those monsters reached here. In a corner of a room, a man looked down towards his pistol, snorting before chuckling to himself, as he put the gun against his head, and closed his eyes with a smile of acceptance. He was spotted by a young man going through several radios to get into contact with at least one of them on the field before he froze, and stared at his comrade. Hey. Dawn, bang. Nothing he could have done or said would have changed his decision. Shock, as quickly as they felt it, was shoved aside in favor for trying to keep and getting in contacts with their troops and allies on the battlefield. But the mood turned grimmer and grimmer, as many paled in realization of their situation, looking through several of their still functional cameras, showing the Charlotte family closing in on them while stepping over numerous dead bodies. Some even paraded their bodies around with a smile on their face. Slam. Fuck. An older gentleman slammed his fist on the desk before standing up and turning towards the door to leave the command room. Hey Hank. What the hell are we supposed to do? You are foreseeing and leading this battle, aren't you? A man stood up and looked at Hank, who had a sullen face, void of any emotions. We ain't foreseeing shit. We all are just spectators witnessing a fucking massacre down there. He shouted through gritted teeth, causing the men to flinch, but he didn't back down, and fired back with another question. What are we supposed to do then? Leave was what he simply said, but the weight behind those words was heavy. But what about our boss? He will personally hang our heads on a pike for desertion. The man said, stressed out over the situation like many others, while Hank snorted at that. Well, if you want to deal with that, be my guest. We either die here or die trying to escape this hellhole. Hank shrugged, as he raised his arm to point at one of the cameras. They all turned heads to what he was pointing at, and blanked in utter fear. The camera showed Charlotte, Mascarpone, and Mascarpone taking turns, stabbing a man, the siblings holding calculative gazes, as they went for stabs that wouldn't kill the man. They were playing some sort of twisted fucked up game, the game seemingly being to try and prolong the man's suffering, the loser probably being the one giving the finishing blow. As they stabbed him, and he still lived through it, they seemed relieved he lived through that, and laughed it off before the cycle continued. Judging by his injuries through the cameras alone, injuries sustained to the back. 10 stab wounds, each seemingly stabbed between organs, possible chance that they have stabbed one of his lungs, with how 2 of the 10 stab wounds were on his upper back, particularly around his left side. Injuries sustained in the legs. Left with 5 swords stabbed into his leg, and right having 6 swords stabbed, impaling him on the spot, no chance of crawling away unless he rips them off. His toes are also off, and his Achilles heels are sliced, the wound halfway from completely amputating his foot, which dangled around, holding on to the still intact flesh. Injuries sustained in the arms. Left and right hand, all fingers cut off, along with the sword impaling the palms of his hands onto the ground, similar to the legs, impaling them. Both elbows bruised and bent backwards in an abnormal and seemingly excruciating agonizing state, along with several stab wounds on his arms. Injuries sustained around head. Both pupils and eyes seemingly having different size, one seemingly shrunken while the other was slightly bigger, a sign of a concussion with the lack of symmetry, probably from whatever hit him in the head, causing him to bleed all over his face. As he gasped when stabbed, a look into his mouth displayed a severed bleeding tongue, along with a handful of teeth missing from his mouth. Yeah, fuck that. They were getting the fuck out of here before they became their toy. There are emergency rowboats stored away in one of the facilities at the back of the island. Use them to sail away, as far as you can from this place. This brought relief to them somewhat, knowing they did in fact have a chance of survival in this ordeal, albeit it was quite slim, but they would rather take that than guaranteed torment by the hands of the Charlotte family. What about you, Hank? One of them looked at him in curiosity. What the hell was he trying to do in this situation? Because he's sure as hell doesn't seem like he was going to go with them. Go and meet our boss. Consider it me buying you guys time before he finds out about our desertion, cause he sure hell will chase us down to the ends of the earth when he realizes. Yes. Thank you, sir. They all quickly left, as Hank simply stood by the door's side, letting his comrades pass through by him. As they all left to try and find a way to escape, he went up to the mic and made an announcement through the speakers. Attention. Run away. Get away from this hellhole. Resistance against the Big Mom Pirates is futile. Get the fuck away from those demons. He put down the mic while internally thinking about his words in amusement. Even in the grim situation, that must be pretty demoralizing to hear. But it's better they knew about their shit situation right now. Some might be able to live because of his announcement even, but that's just blissful thinking. He left the command room, and went the opposite way his man had gone, making his way to his boss's room, and now that he thought about it, why the hell was he seemingly so quiet? Earlier he was in the command room with him overseeing the fight through gritted teeth, and several veins popping off around his body in pure anger before he left, slamming the door behind him, the walls cracking along with the force. As he walked, the hallway shook from an explosion that sounded awfully close to the base, which made him walk faster. Walking a pile of steps upwards to reach the top floor with a straight path towards the upstairs, leading to his boss's room. Taking each step, he took a couple of deep breaths before standing in front of the doors. He looked at it for a good second or two before huffing, shrugging his shoulders, and just kicking the doors open with a good kick. No point in having manners considering the situation. Looking around the room, he narrowed his eyes, as he observed everything. Piles of papers were scattered all over the floor near the desk which had bottles of alcohol on them. Speaking of alcohol, numerous bottles laid around along with the papers, all mostly empty. Some stained the floor, while the bottle that contained them was nothing more than mere shattered shards and fragments. He walked past the desk, and looked down from the observation deck of the room, and grimaced. His boss probably spectated everything from here, drinking to take away the stress, but it seemed it did nothing with how many bottles he counted were empty. He went into the door to the left, leading to his boss's bedroom, and opening it normally this time. He gulped before his jaw hung in disbelief, as his eyes widened, his pupils shrunk, and shook rapidly in pure shock. He slammed the door shut, and slumped his back on it, sliding his body down before he sat down, leaning on the door, still shocked by the sight he had witnessed. His body twitched, and shook before he had found the strength to stand up, albeit shaking a lot, as he did. He just couldn't believe it. So that's why he's been quiet for a while, he said, as he saw a bottle of whiskey roll towards him, to which he picked up with amusement. At least the Lord was merciful enough to give him a last drink. It took a while, but he got his breathing under control before leaving the room with a sullen look, with eyes filled with disappointment at what he saw. He took out the whiskey bottle he found inside the room, and chugged it all, and tossed the empty bottle behind him, and continued walking, this time towards the entrance, to where the Charlottes would come and face him. If he was going to confront them, he was going to go down swinging. He sighed, only having one thought going through his head, as he faced forward, marching to essentially his death, just like how he walked to the guillotine before he was saved. What a coward you have become. You, who wouldn't hesitate to rush in ahead of all of us in a fight. You, who would drink and party, bringing life to our gang which was still small back then. You, who let your ego go into your head, and started showing your true colors to us all. You, who preached about always fighting alongside us, now lead behind us. You, who would only target Marine and noble scum, now doesn't hesitate when killing a family. You, who used to share the gold with everyone, and finding it trivial, now hoarded it to yourself, even if it meant killing us off. And now, you who hated living the easy life took the easy way out. Truly, what a piece of shit you have become. Hank sighed, reminiscing about the good old days. He was supposed to have been executed years ago, all because a nobleman didn't like how he had secretly passed food to a slave what his masters had turned away from him. The audience didn't give much of a shit about him. Some did shoot him sympathetic glances, but the older ones, the ones too used to the brutality of the world, just gave a cold indifferent look. They were too used to seeing people hang, beheaded, and impaled, be it some unlucky pickpocket or some child who bumped into a noble or celestial dragon on accident. Someone was always going to be on the chopping board, and they could do nothing but watch in fear of joining them too. If it wasn't for his boss, who was way different back then, he would have been beheaded. From a group who went around hunting, skinning, and dissecting nobles of numerous kingdoms, to a group viewed as rightfully a bunch of savage monsters that kill everything on sight. Where did it all go wrong? Hank took a deep breath, as he found a crate, and dragged it along. As he reached the front gates, keeping him between the incoming Charlottes and him, he put the crate down, and sat on it. He took out his steel sheath, and laid it on his lap, and unsheathed it, slowly running his fingers along the blade. A blade he used to kill the same noble who gave him the death sentence. The same blade he used to cut down people who didn't deserve it. Genocidio Justo was the cutlass he named. He found it on a display case of some noble he killed in his bedroom, couldn't help himself, and took it as his main blade. Keeping a blade sheathed behind glass was stupid in his opinion, unless it was a merchant. Swords are meant to be used, not as a trophy to show to others. The only exception with showing it off was if you were going to slice someone with it. He snorted like all the other times, as he thought about the name he picked for it, the genocide and massacres this cutlass has witnessed, and gutted was not righteous of all. He stood up, and stabbed the blade in the ground, and kept a firm grip on it, as he stared at the door, feeling his demise approaching him. It was well deserved with what he had done, and an appropriate fate to boot. He, who slayed the weak who viewed him as a monster, was now going to be slayed by people he considered monsters who probably considered them weak. Would have been nice to fight alongside the original founding members of the group. Too bad they all died by the hands of his boss, because he deemed them weak except for Hank. Bastard even had the audacity to replace his first mate by dumping his corpse into the ocean, and getting some piece of shit going by Gore Fisher for his high bounty, instead of his fighting powers. He tore off his uniform that was issued for every official member, after his bastard of a former boss said in those regulations which sucked ass. He will not fight as Hank the silhouette of organ harvesters. He will fight as Hank and nothing else, just some exceptionally strong murderer making his last stance for nobody but himself now. Maybe after all of this is over, he could finally have a reunion toast with his true fellow bastards in HELL, Smoothie, and Luffy's paw. Oh? So, your older brother raised you instead of Garp? Yeah. Besides training us brutally whenever he came back, he usually left for months, so Ace took care and raised me all by himself. Right now, Smoothie and Luffy carried on their conversation from the canteen to the outsides. As they continued jogging, they heard the announcement going through the speakers that probably sent the surviving enemies away from here. Less pests to deal with was good, but makes this hunt duller and more boring. Hopefully the ones who made some dumb last stand would be strong. There are bound to be stubborn fools who stayed and fought to their death. Smoothie hummed as she put a hand on her chin and thought, that did make sense, and no sense at all. It was understandable because Garp, albeit old, was still an active Marine who with his reputation, rank, and standing, would likely spend the majority of his time out at sea with whatever mission he had to deal with. Also, the old bastard clearly did it to conceal Luffy and Ace's existence to the world. Assuming the Navy knew about Garp's son, they would get suspicious of why he visited Dawn Island so many times. That's a sign of something being utmost of importance to him at the island. And there is bound to be one who gets too curious and investigates why he visits the island a lot, which is why he rarely visited his children well, if he actually thought that part or even planned it all. It honestly was fortunate for Garp to choose bandits who seemingly had a soft spot for them, albeit their teaching methods were cruel for children, with how they had to hunt their own food with animals, majorly being beasts from what Luffy had told him. But it was a lesson they needed with their heritage and goals. They were going to be on their own when they set sailed, and all. They needed the survival skills if they ever got stranded and washed ashore on an unknown island. On the other hand, who the fuck would leave their adopted and biological grandchild to take care of themselves, especially in a house of bandits to boot? Garp's reputation as the hero of the Navy was a heavy and enormous title to have. He could have requested from Sengoku to put his position on hiatus to raise and actually properly groom his children to be Marines, under the guise of cashing in his well-deserved vacation, because Smoothie knew from Mama's report from her spies that he was active as fuck on the seas. So a break would be logical from how hard he seemingly worked. Better yet, Garp could have given them to Sengoku. That guy, despite being a manipulative and cunning bastard, was an intelligent and patient person he could properly raise, and taught Luffy and Ace as normal kids, gave them fake identities to hide their bloodline if he ever found out, although that was left up to chance. Whether he executes them or not for their lineage was up to Sengoku's hands. Hell, he could have steered them into the righteous path of being the Marine bullshit. Although Garp taking a vacation is a better option than that. She groaned in frustration as her thoughts clashed from whether or not Garp was a piece of shit, or the old Marine could only do so much on his own. He might, and probably even have gone a bit senile at that time with his age. To bitch slap a man or to stab and drain a man within an inch of their lives. Either way, she was going to hurt him for what he did. When she hears about Garp's next sightings, Marine hero or not, she ain't walking or sailing away unless she gets a hit in. She then moved on to another topic which was less grim and was more amusing and entertaining to her. Do you still retain your title of champion of the Underground Dawn? Smoothie asked curiously, to which Luffy nodded with a smile. Still reigned undefeated. He pumped his fists victoriously while Smoothie giggled at that in amusement. One of the many interesting and curious things she heard from her brother at the age of 6, 3 months before meeting Shanks. Garp, quite literally, yeeted his fucking grandson into an underground ring full of giant men with physiques comparable to a muscle builder, and heights of as tall as houses. Well, Luffy was still a short 6-year-old at least. Not only that, Luffy's first opponent was nicknamed Bone Grinder by the crowd because he tended to continuously stomp a person's body, even after cracking their bones, as if hammering them into dust. There were so many problems from what Luffy told him, but she just nodded with a smile, instead of being concerned about his opponent, because why would she worry about her little brother that had the blood of Mama and that bastard running in his veins? As such, it was no surprise when Luffy brightly beamed at her, as he proudly talked about how he had one punch knock out the man after a sec the bell rang. And did the same to the next, and the next until he reached the last guy. At least he had to punch his face 2 times rather than 1 to bring him down. Smoothie had no doubt in her mind that Garp betted on Luffy with a shitload of money in the process, as he fought his way to the top. He should talk with Cracker about fighting in an underground ring. He frequents them to gamble his money. He would be more than happy to send you to beat someone to a pulp. Smoothie suggested with a smile, casually exposing something Cracker tried and failing miserably to hide, while not seeing any problems with that statement, as Luffy grinned in excitement. Really? Smoothie nodded almost sagely indeed. Not only that, but they are way tougher than those idiots you fought. Luffy laughed at that prospect. I can't wait. Let's go beat their captain's ass already. His morale seemingly shot up as he now ran while Smoothie huffed in amusement before following suit. Right behind you, Smoothie cheerfully said, as she looked on, observing the empty streets. She sensed only a few signs of life now. They were retreating away from here, either hiding or getting away from the island. As they ran through the streets, Smoothie took a side glance at a house to her right. Her eyes widened, as she got a split-second glimpse at the inside through the open door. There was a skeleton with clothes still on, leaning through the door. The bones were dusty, and her skull had cobwebs sticking to the floor. She turned her head, and looked at the path ahead instead, but with a calculative look on her face before shaking it off. Smoothie can investigate later. Killing the boss of this operation came first. It took them 5 minutes before they finally reached the base, both siblings having the same thought process, and kicking the door, blasting it off its hinges, as dust formed from the impact. As it settled, they were met with a black-haired topless man, exposing many scars over his bodies, while his hands firmly gripped his sword that was stabbing the ground. His cold eyes stared at them with a calculative gaze. Smoothie shot him back a glare of her own, and took out her sword. This man gave off a vibe different from the rest. He might prove to be somewhat of a better challenge compared to the common brutes. Luffy, on the other hand, raised his fist up with a challenging grin on his face, not sensing any danger radiating from him at all, although he could sense an aura of solitary coming off from the enemy. "You aren't the boss, who are you?" Smoothie said, pointing the sword at him, holding authority in her voice. She wasn't asking, she demanded it. The man across from them just snorted before standing up, and pointing his sword at them. No words coming out of his mouth, but his actions spoke for him clearly. "Just fight." And so, with a shrug from Smoothie, the siblings charged at the man who got into his stance. "Sir, TSK, he's gone, keep an eye out," Smoothie warned, getting into a defensive position looking around the room while Luffy did the same with his back facing hers, looking around the room which turned dead quiet. "Hi-ha." He quickly whipped his body round, but he wasn't there. "Eh? Was I seeing things? I thought I saw his shadows," though, Luffy said, confused before Smoothie's body shot up, and turned to face her brother, who stared at her confused on why she looked so tense. "Watch out." She quickly raised her sword, and aimed it at Luffy's head. The rubber boy, getting the message, ducked down a second before Smoothie plunged her sword, stabbing the ground behind him. A split second before she hit her target, the shadow closing in on her brother, quickly retreated back into another shadow. "What was that?" Luffy said, tilting his head in confusion looking at where she stabbed before. "Navri Valona Black Needle." Suddenly, a black hand appeared from the shadows, pointing at them before several black spikes conjured, and flew towards him. Luffy coated his arms in armament hockey, and punched them away while Smoothie parried them, even deflecting a couple back, but midway through, the projectiles disappeared. "Be on guard. He's got a devil fruit related to shadows or something." Smoothie used her observation. Sensing a presence, she lunged forward, and kicked the wall which the man was seemingly in with hockey infused into her legs, but he quickly slithered away before she could actually kick him. "Shadows. Moria." Luffy tried to think, but before he could, quickly twisted his body, and punched the blade with his arm still blackened, as it met the blade of the man. "Correct, but wrong. I ate the cage no me. I am a shadow person. But unlike that pinball of a man, I am a Loja that can blend into the shadows," he said with a grin before swinging his blade back before his entire body seemingly turned black, and melted into the floor. Before fully submerging, with a grin still on his face, he said one last thing. "If I'm dying, I might as well take down one of Yonko's precious sweet generals and sons." His laughter echoed from everywhere around the room, while Luffy and Smoothie looked around the room tensed. "Back to back," she shouted with her sword raised while Luffy grunted in acknowledgement, although he slammed himself onto her legs, rather than her back due to her height. "You have been training with Rayleigh, right? With your current observation hockey, what can you detect and sense?" she asked while keeping her guard on. "I can tell where and when he's going to hit me, but I can't tell where a person is exactly at yet, but I'm close," Luffy responded, arms up. "Can sense incoming attacks, but can't pinpoint a person's location," got as she summarized. "How about you?" Luffy asked in curiosity. "I want to know what level I need to be on. I can sense when he is going to attack, and can tell where he is, even pinpoint his location even if he's far," Smoothie said plainly while Luffy gasped aerially amazing. "Can you tell where the nearest restaurant is with hockey?" The older sister huffed, and started to now smile in amusement. "Indeed, I'm the second best when it comes to observing hockey, first being Katakuri," she said, proud of her elder brother. "Airy, less talking, more fighting." Hank once again appeared from the shadows, and used the opportunity to try and plunge his sword through Luffy's chest. Smoothie on the other hand grinned, sensing him finally stopping dead in his tracks. "Finally, you damn slippery bastard." She quickly turned to face the man bursting forth from the shadows, with his sword pointing at Luffy. She reeled her blade back which had a blue glow coming off from it. "You see saber?" She thrust it forward, and the blue glow seemingly formed like an extension of her blade, making it longer. She used her empowered blade to stab the man's arm into the wall, but the attack simply passed through his arms. "Idiot. I am a Loja, you can't hurt me without Gomu, no rifle." He punched that proud grin off his face, as it connected with his hockey hardened fist, while Smoothie kept her grin. "Hockey, was what you were going to say, yes?" Too bad for you, most of us have it. Smoothie raised her right leg which blackened in hockey, and kicked the man's torso hard, getting him to cough up blood from his mouth. The man gritted his teeth before slamming his hands on the back of the wall. Statanos the Lamo's dark chamber. Several black stones shot out from the shadows above and below them, making them back away from the man while having their guard up, as he didn't submerge in the shadows. He just stood there taking deep breaths. As expected from a sweet general, and a person who took down 3 admirals. Tell me boy, are you really Big Mom's child? Hank said looking at him. He was the only one in the room besides his boss who witnessed Straw Hat with the family. Everyone else was too busy panicking and directing everyone on the field into position. It was quite the shocker to see someone like him with the family of all people. Luffy nodded with a smile. Yeah. Dad took me away from Mama, and my siblings don't know why though, he shrugged while Hank huffed. That Sawyer family is weird, you know that brat. Hank huffed before raising his fists to fight while Luffy did the same laughing away. Yeah. Well whatever, Mavro Kanoni Black Cannon. The man raised his hand with an open palm, and a ball-like object the size of his hand burst forth from it, rapidly flying towards Luffy grinned, and just dropped his hand, ready to deflect the ball before the last second. His observation went off, and he sidestepped, narrowly missing the cannonball much to his confusion. He got his answer when several spikes sprang forth from it, to which he gulped. Man, that was close. Smithy on the other hand charged from the sides while he was focused on her brother. Got you. She reeled her sword back, as the blue glow coated her sword again. This time it seemed the tip was glowing brighter, and brighter before she lunged forward. Human mixer. A small blue glowing ball shot forward towards Hank, who looked at the ball for a split second before it bursted, and he was now in a miniature tornado of juice. He tried holding on, but eventually he got caught up, and swirled around in it before it exploded, sending him flying towards Luffy with his head stretched back. Gomu gomu no, ding, bell. His head collided with Hank, who fell down to the floor holding his head from the severe headache he had gained from that headbutt. Before he could do anything, Smithy already pointed a blade near his neck. Don't try anything, give up, and we might take you prisoner. Hank on the other hand signed, but ultimately raised his hands up. You got me, what do you want? He asked, looking towards the 2 siblings. Simple, we're your bosses. Hank flinched before looking down. Top floor doesn't expect much of a challenge from him. Luffy blinked at that before looking up at Smoothie, both siblings staring at each other before looking at Hank. That was easy. Stay here, and don't try anything funny. My siblings can kick your ass just as easily as we did. She threatened before retracting her sword. I don't really have much of a choice here, do I? Hank huffed while Smoothie simply nodded. You're strong though, nowhere near us sweet generals, but still quite strong. Mama might have some uses for you, Smoothie said ominously, as she sheathed her blade back while Hank gulped in worry. Alright. Let's go kick that guy's ass. Luffy went back to being joyful while Smoothie huffed once again, right behind you. Before leaving, she glared one last time at Hank, putting her thumb across her neck while letting her tongue out. Hank nodded rapidly at that. The message was clear. Try and leave when we are gone to deal with your boss. I will find you and behead you. They made their way through the stairs, going through several hallways. As they do, they passed by several paintings and decorative ornaments. They even passed by a hallway that had a display of armor knights that were old and rusty. Eventually they passed by a door labeled command room. Taking a peek inside, the screens were all static, and a bunch of papers were all lying around, chairs seemingly thrown all over the place. If they had leaned closer towards the window, they would have seen the corpse of another man that took the easy way out of this ordeal. They eventually reached the stairs, and took it, walking up one last corridor, that had a bunch of glass fragments shattered all over near the door that led to the boss's room. Smoothie and Luffy nodded, and were on guard, prepared for any surprise attack, as they stepped inside. As they stepped inside, the only noticeable thing were the empty glass bottles. Much to their confusion, they both shrugged before they went, and opened different doors, Smoothie opening the right, and Luffy opening the left. Smoothie closed hers, as quickly as she opened it. He wasn't hiding inside his own bathroom. Nothing in here, able Luffy. She turned her head, and was concerned about seeing her brother's expression. He gulped, and just started gasping in disbelief before Smoothie walked up behind him to see what caused such a reaction. She widened her eyes, and clenched her fist at the sight. The bastard hanged himself, she said in slight shock, staring at his body which was motionless, while the noose around his neck was firm and strong. His neck also seemed to have stretched a bit. He must have hung himself for quite some time now. They were expecting a big fight, but was this even a victory? Luffy walked away, summarizing the dead man with one word, which Smoothie nodded in agreement with before she followed him closely behind. Coward, AN. For those wondering what is up with Hank's attack, he's shouting his attacks in Greek, while the English part is just translation. P.S. Luffy is colder when it comes to death. It's a mix of his Charlotte lineage, and his past which was more traumatizing, and etc. Suicide is the same as giving up on your dreams in Luffy's eyes, thus he views it as a cowardly thing to do. Anyway, here's a more cheerful canonomic of Sengoku, finally letting himself go. Mao. The Buddha reached enlightenment. Play Orgasm Anthem by Wanuka around here. Turn that shit up. Sengoku right now was in an underground illegal rave out of uniform, and was wearing a Hawaii shirt along with some shorts. He probably should be reporting the illegal activity to the authorities, but fuck it, it's his vacation, and besides, it's just some harmless FUN years of managing so much stuff, and bullshit from his shitty government superiors, was quite a toll on him. Not to mention Garp's family, he can finally give less of a shit about what Garp's grandchildren are up to now. He cracked the cork of a wine bottle for himself at that pleasurable thought, as he chugged away his worries. No longer had he needed to put up a front as a fleet admiral that manages the navy. He was now Sengoku, an old man that retired from his grueling duties, and was currently experiencing the life of the party. The music raged on, as he continued drinking his problems away, laughing, as he danced along with the crowd, lights flashing all over the place. He was snapped out of his drunken state when he felt his den ringing in his pocket. He grumbled, but ultimately went somewhere quieter, and more isolated to take the call. Finding a nice place away from the fun zone, he took out the snail, and answered. Hello, this is former Fleet Admiral Sengoku on the line, totally not participating in an illegal event, along with stealing a bit of Admiral Borsellino's stash of weed. He answered calmly, as if he didn't snitch on himself or Kizaru at all. What? Never mind that, Sengoku-san. We have an emergency. The Buddha blinked, as he recognized that voice. Oh? Branu? Why are you calling? Has Akainu finally found a way to grow a pair of new ones for himself or something? Sengoku said plainly. No. I see. Has he taken up on Akiji's offer to transition to a woman, because he always considered Akainu to be a whore for justice before he left? No. Oh wait, don't say it. I already know you finally found Kizaru's secret stash, right? No sir. Wait, are you drunk? Huh? I have no idea what you're talking about, Sengoku said before he looked at the contents of the rum bottle he was drinking from, and whistled. Damn, this stuff is stronger than the sake we have on the base. Blah, nothing brand new. Anyways, what is the matter? Sengoku coughed into his throat, sounding professional, somewhat. The golden lion Shiki is sighted coming towards Sabati. Sengoku flinched, and was a bit startled by how loud Branu shouted. Is that so? Sengoku rubbed his beard calmly before shrugging, cupping his mouth into the microphone. Shit. But the connection breaking up. Good luck, you're on your own, Saya. He hung up, and threw his den mushi to the ocean with a shrug. He could get a new one when he came back to base. He was sure Akainu could figure out what to do with Roger's former rival, if not. Sucks to be in his position, and luckily, he wasn't. Now then, back to reaching ENLIGHTENMENT. Sengoku smiled to himself, as he entered back to the rave with a skip in his steps, back to obtaining inner peace. He should have retired a long time ago, and dumped his work on someone else instead. Smoothie and Luffy walked back down to Hank. Both had grim expressions, while their eyes of various emotions pierced at him, which had him looking down, finding the floor more enticing, rather than facing their expressions of disappointment. They both wordlessly walked outside, while Smoothie simply dug her fingers into Hank's scalp, and dragged him along with them. Both siblings' moods were dampened by the sight they saw upstairs. Going outside, she lightened the grip on his head, and slammed it towards the wall, hard, with all the pent-up frustration from what she saw upstairs, knocking him out instantly from the impact. Luffy and Smoothie just stood there in silence before the older woman broke it with a sigh, noticing the gloomy look in her brother's eyes. Most people take themselves out for many reasons, either to not give the enemy the satisfaction of finishing them off or giving up in general, but it's still a sight you don't really want to see, even if you have seen it multiple times. Luffy hummed in reply, looking downwards, as his bangs covered his head. Not the first time. Smoothie raised an eyebrow at that, filled with curiosity before Luffy elaborated, diving back into memories he long left ago. 10 years ago, when Luffy was 7 years old. Monster. Young Luffy painted, as he knocked the last of Blue Jam's men down, before he glared at the man who was petrified in fear at the sight in front of him, as the flames around them burned brightly. How? Those are bloody sea stone shackles. Blue Jam staggered, taking steps back, as he unsheathed his swords, and pointed it shakily towards the small menace in front of him, this demon of a child. Ace, are you okay? Luffy continued staring towards Blue Jam, as the younger Ace breathed heavily, but ultimately got up with hands on his knees. Yeah. The elder brother responded, as he clenched onto his pipe after knocking down a couple of them. They both have taken out around 20 to 30 men that now laid lifelessly round them. Luffy let out a sigh of relief before his stance became slouched, and he knelt down, exhausted, as he raised one of his hands lazily, cursing the sea stone cuffs on his wrists. They all ganged upon him, just to put the cuffs on to weaken him, and beat the shit out of him, but not before two of them were kneeling in pain from the punch and kicks of retaliation he gave out. They forced them to do their gang's bidding for a bit, as they constantly had 10 men on watch, on guard, knowing their capabilities despite being children. But unfortunately, they just had to talk about what was going on with Sabo, which led to this scenario of two brothers pissed beyond belief. Immediately Ace quickly got towards his little brother's side, and knelt down, putting a hand on his shoulders, and looking towards the weird cuffs that put him in such a state, and started cursing. Damn. There isn't anything around to pick and lock them. Ace cursed his luck, feeling like shit he couldn't really do much to prevent those bastards from weakening him severely with Sea Stone. He knew Luffy was leagues ahead of him, but that was no excuse for letting this happen. As an older brother to him, it was pathetic of him honestly. Luffy gave a big grin, albeit very forcefully. I will be fine. We just got to kick his ass. With resolve rekindled, and burning brightly one last time before the curse of the sea fully does him in, he groaned harshly, as he forced himself upwards, and cracked his knuckles, clenching his fist, blackening them with haki that only lasted for a second before it dissipated. Damn, I can't concentrate properly. Luffy gritted his teeth at the cuffs that could somehow nullify his devil fruit powers, and put him in such a state, along with getting beaten severely well weakened. Honestly, it was a miracle he was still up, and going. Why is that brat so important to you? He's just some goddamn noble child in his rebellious phase. That brat is going to grow up, and out of that phase, and show his true colors, becoming like his shitty little daddy. A rich scumbag glaring down at us like trash. The older man clenched his fists in frustration, as everything was crumbling down, the flames closing in, as his life seemed to have reached a roadblock, the end of his journey, for he couldn't see anything ahead. Luffy and Ace snapped their heads towards him with fury that burned brightly, as the flames around them, but out of the two, Ace rage burned brighter. Blue Jam could even physically feel the heat he irradiated purely from anger. If he had his devil fruit from the future right now, he could have actually been burned alive by it. Don't compare Sabo's failure of an asshole father towards him. He will never ever become like that sack of shit. He was drilling holes into the man's soul, disregarding his swear filter around Luffy just for this time. Yeah. Sabo ain't like that. Luffy added his 2 cents in, as both brothers raised their fist weapon up, ready to throttle the son of a bitch before. He chuckled, which got them confused. What are you laughing at? Have you finally lost your mind? Ace taunted him, but was tense, as the only thing that did was have him laughing more. It seems, Captain. Luffy and Ace frozen stiff at the unfamiliar masculine voice that sounded from a distance behind them. No, they were already tired from crying out loud. That fortune is on my side. Blue Jam grinned maniacally, as both exhausted brothers turned around, and couldn't help but sweat at the sight. There was another group of Blue Jam's men. They had no idea where they came from, but it wasn't looking good. Could they pull it off one more time? Especially when after dealing with them, they had to face off with Blue Jam. It was fight or die, and if this was their resting place, then fuck it, they weren't going down easily. But before they could reach them, what do you think you're trying to pull off on my boys? Luffy and Ace lit up at the familiar voice, smiles spreading on their faces, as the mountain bandits intercepted Blue Jam's man, and clashed head-on with Daiden calmly coming into view with her axe slumped on her shoulders, walking towards them with a cigarette, and a dark look on her voice, clearly not amused by Blue Jam's shenanigans. Daiden? Said woman huffed, but visibly lightened up seeing the two brothers call out to her. Looking at the two, they were a bit roughed up, but ultimately okay, just scrapes and bruises at best, no permanent damage by the looks of it. But they were clearly struggling to stand upright while breathing heavily. She looked further on ahead, and upwards, and changed demeanor quickly, as she drilled holes into Blue Jam's soul, saying the man had his jaw hanging low in disbelief, as hope shattered right in front of him. Ace. Get whatever is off of Luffy's wrist, and kick that bastard's ass. Dogger came running towards his boss's side, reeling his arm back before throwing a set of lockpicks towards Ace, who caught it, jumping to grab it, and immediately got to work. Blue Jam tried to take a cheap shot by leaping towards the brothers when they weren't focused on him, but before he could even swing down his sword, a weird-looking man whose appearance somewhat resembled a chicken, burst forth from the flames, and met his blade with his own. Don't even try it, Magro said with narrowed eyes, as he pushed him back with his own blade, which had Blue Jam gritting his teeth at the man. Clink. Alright. I'm going to kick your ass. Luffy cracked his knuckles, as the cuffs fell onto the floor. He got into a stance, but before he could launch himself towards Blue Jam, Ace patted him on the shoulder, getting his attention. Launch me at that bastard. The younger brother nodded without protesting on getting a hit on the bastard himself, and stretched his arms way back while Ace got in front, and kneeled. Gomu no bazooka. Luffy gritted his teeth, as his arms violently retracted, and lashed forwards towards Ace with open palms, the older brother jumping perfectly in time to get sent flying towards Blue Jam's head like a missile, with the older man staggering back in shock and surprise. Bonk, ga. Blue Jam choked on his vocals, as his head violently snapped backwards, as Ace swung his hockey-coated fist towards his head, memories flowing through in his head off every lesson from Luffy on how hockey worked. And also unknowingly unlocking his conqueror's hockey back in the time this way. The sheer emotions flowing through him was at its peak for it to shine. Never talk shit about my brother. Ace sighed, as he looked towards the sky, taking a deep breath before turning, and facing his younger brother who grinned, and gave a thumbs up, which had him doing the same thing back at him. He walked towards Luffy calmly. It was over for now. They still needed to get Sabo back from his jerk of his parents. Ha, so this is it. Ace immediately turned 180 back at Blue Jam, who slowly and shakingly raised his torso up, clearly still feeling the pain from Ace's hit, along with the effect of Conqueror's hockey. You still want more, you son of a bitch. Ace easily reignited, and was ready to throw another one, and quite possibly an extra to make sure he stayed down for good. Lijam snorted and raised his hands up. Nah, I give up, this isn't for me. He stood up while groaning harshly in pain before bending down and grabbing his sword, which had Ace doubting he was actually surrendering. He snorted at how tense the brat was. Relax kid, this sword ain't pointing towards you, this is it for me. My crew's beaten up, and I myself got beaten by you brats. Honestly pathetic, even took orders from a bloody noble too of all people. He sighed, disappointed at himself, as rubbed his palm downwards on his face before grinning at them. His final words echoed and ringed in their head for a long time before they moved on. Him placing his own sword on his throat took more time to forget about. When you brats come over to where I'm going, let's all sit down and have a drink, eh? Be sure you die, as a man though. He slit his neck and fell back, choking on his blood, as he shook violently before becoming still, staring at the night skies in his final moments. Luffy and Ace just stared at the bodies, even with Magra trying to block their views. It was already embedded into their minds, they had seen enough already. Aiden patted their shoulders from behind with an unreadable expression on her face, but the tone of her voice was enough. Let's go home. No, not until we get thud. Aiden made sure to catch them before they fell from exhaustion. Back to the presents. Smithy didn't interrupt her brother, as he recollected the day before Sabo died. For two boys to beat that many people was honestly impressive, especially when Luffy had sea stone cuffs on throughout the brawl. When he got to Dayton's family coming in and saving them from another brawl, she paid close attention in hearing about how Luffy described the mountain bandits that raised them coming in to intercept a second group of enemies. She respected the woman herself along with the bandits for what they did. Smithy genuinely wanted to meet Dayton and give her gratitude for what she did for her brother. Maybe she could ask Mama to make Dayton the godmother of Luffy. She was a tough but caring woman deep within, secretly loving them, but didn't show it from what Smithy had gathered. Now Ace was a person she took great interest in, with how he was not only the son of Goldie Roger, but also Luffy's sworn brother. To unlock Haki, and especially Conqueror's Haki at such a young age, was also abnormal like Luffy, but to be expected with his blood lineage, along with prior lessons from his younger brother, who was trained by Garp and taught by Shanks. Honestly, she couldn't help but think about the elder siblings, especially Pear Sparrow, Compet, and Katakuri, when hearing about how Ace violently snapped at a person talking shit about his sibling. But to be fair, anyone would. The only person allowed to talk shit about their brother or sister was another sibling, and no one else. And then there's Blue Gem. She honestly didn't know how to feel about his death. Dayton told me later that when people's dreams and ambitions are crushed with no hope in sight, they will get super sad. Sometimes, those people kill themselves. Luffy said softly, still remembering how she dragged him away from Ace for that private talk. Is that why most of the people you fight, you let live? Smithy asked, remembering that detail. Despite how strong his brother was, he never killed that many. A couple of bones at best, and life-changing injuries at worst, but ultimately, anyone who fights Luffy tends to still be alive majority of the time. Luffy shrugged at that. Something like that. I just don't see the point in killing people unless I really need to, and besides. He slowly tilted his head towards Smithy, his face making even a sweet commander like her have shivers tingle down her spine. What's the point of killing someone who's already dead at that point? I see, she simply replied before they just stood there awkwardly. How about you? Smithy blinked, as Luffy looked at her in curiosity. Fortunately, he seemed to be somewhat back to his usual self. She hummed to herself before gazing towards the night skies, while Luffy just patiently waited. It's neither a common nor an uncommon sight around here, but it really depends on the person and situation. She finally said after some thought, as she dug through her memories. The first time I saw someone killing themselves was when I was 10. She sighed, remembering that sight. Cracker was out claiming territory, and I begged him to bring me along because I was interested in what places outside Toto Land looked like. He brought the topic to Mama, who gave the green light, but added the condition to bring his sisters with him to babysit me. Naturally, me and Cracker along with Angel and Custard sailed towards the island. We decimated their forces, burned a couple of their buildings, and well, I just stumbled upon a person leaping off a chair, hanging from a noose around their neck. While I was drinking my smoothie, my appetite was ruined quite quickly, she quickly summarized. Huh? Are you talking about us? Smithy and Luffy looked up to see the mentioned triplets walking up to them. Ah, nice for you three to join us. I was telling a little bro here about past memories. Smithy smiled towards them. Memories? Custard tilted her head while Smithy nodded. That island you guys conquered when I was 10. Ah, that time, Angel simply said while nodding to herself, having a neutral face before having a frown, remembering what Smithy saw. Why of all things to talk to Luffy about? Smithy leaned forward and gestured for them to do the same, whispering to them a summary of what Luffy told her, which had them grimacing. Damn, that's rough, little bro, Cracker said while ruffling Luffy's hair as he got out of his armor a while ago. What about those bastards that were under him? Probably dead. Any survivors from the fire would be put down by a weird man in these yellow suits, covering everything. Luffy simply replied, shrugging. He felt bad for them, but he didn't know them well, so he never gave that much of a damn about them. Clean up probably, Angel soundly concluded grimly, with the older siblings nodding in agreement solemnly. 10 years ago, nearly round the time where Smoothie became a sweet general. Ha, Custard muttered while rubbing her chin, while Luffy perked up at that. Sweet general? What's that? Food. Luffy asked which of the siblings, blinking before they huddled towards the sidelines, leaning forward to one another, leaving Luffy aside, with the question marks hanging above his head. Now that I think about it, did any of us explain how our family generally works towards him? Custard asked, looking at her two sisters, and older brother who was also just looking at one another before they all looked at Custard. Probably not. Yeah, figures, is it me or do I have this gut feeling he wouldn't give a shit if we explained how we work towards him? Custard now asked another question which had Smoothie snorting. Don't doubt it at all. Well, maybe if meat is involved then he might listen. She shrugged, which of the siblings staring at her in confusion before the sweet general elaborated with a simple sentence. Imagine a version of Mama who loves meat instead of sweets. Ah, say no more. Cracker nodded, getting the gist of it immediately, with his triplet sisters humming alongside him. What are you guys talking about? They blinked before looking at Luffy, as one, and speaking in perfect unity. Nothing. They dispersed, which had Luffy pouting, wanting to know more about what they were talking about. Oh yeah, what about the boss? You guys dealt with him? Cracker asked while looking toward the top of the castle, while Smoothie sighed. Why do you think we suddenly talked about such a grim topic? Oh, another spineless fool. He scoffed while slumping down on the wall. No wonder his two younger siblings started to talk about such a shitty event. Where's Katakuri and Snack, by the way? Smoothie asked, noticing how her fellow sweet commanders weren't here, which was an odd sight, especially when Katakuri absolutely wastes no time. Not sure about Snack, but Katakuri is definitely going door to door in every house, even if he uses observation hockey. His very thorough and extermination. Cracker huffed, while leaning back on the wall before he took out a deck of cards. So, blackjack? He innocently asked, which had them all deadpanning, while Luffy perked up at that. Sure, why not? Luffy walked up and sit across Cracker, who raised an eyebrow. You gamble? Luffy nodded and grinned. Sabo, ace, and I would go to gambling dens because I'm really lucky. Is that so? How about you three? He took out the Joker cards and started shuffling them, as his head faced towards his three present sisters, who looked at each other. Nothing really better to do, so why not? Custard sat next to Luffy's left side, while Angel shrugged before joining in on the younger brother's right side. Cracker looked at Smoothie, who shook her head. Spectator. Cracker nodded, respecting his little sister's decision, and placed the deck down, Luffy being the fastest, and cutting the deck, to which Cracker started shuffling once again for a bit, before flicking the cards towards his siblings. Same rules with me, first is Luffy, and last is Angel. His sisters nodded while Luffy tilted his head. Cards face down instead of up, and if you have 5 cards, and it's equal or less than 21, it's the same as a blackjack. But Luffy slowly nodded in understanding the difference about his version now. Are we betting on anything? Nah, we're playing for fun, save our game faces, and all for Saturday night at the treasury. Custard nodded. Smoothie, mind if you find some crates or chairs along with the table? Got a gut feeling it will be a long game, Angel simply said while looking down towards her cards. Sure. With that, the four were left alone, as they looked at their cards. Luffy 20 King, CSCARD 642, ANGEL 16 Ace 5. All their cards were hidden alongside Cracker. They all looked at their cards with small emotions. Cracker slid the deck towards Luffy, who shook his head, and grinned. Nah, I'm good. He simply nodded before moving on to Custard, who took a card. CSTARD 8422. She took another one, and hummed at it. CSTARD 18422, Ace I'm GOOD. Custard smiled, as her brother moved on to Angel, who was in a dilemma. Screw it, she shrugged, as she wasn't losing anything, and picked a card which had her eyebrow twitching. ANGEL 17 Ace 52. She wordlessly grabbed another card, and blinked. ANGEL 11 Ace 523. She grinned, and flipped her cards, showing them before taking another card. It didn't matter, it was her win no matter what. ANGEL 18 Ace 5237. My WIN. She grinned, which had her brother snorting. Not bad, not bad. Now then. Cracker tapped his fingers, as he had a calculative gaze. He leaned forward, and tapped Custard's card. Open. She did, and proudly showed her hand, to which her brother snorted. Ooh, 1 SHORTO. Right. Open. All CRACKER 19 King, 9. Custard huffed before looking at Luffy, who grinned, and opened his cards. My WIN. Cracker hummed. Alright, that was a pretty good hand, but what about the second round? MBACK. Smoothie put a bit of melody into her tone, as she dropped the crates. Immediately they sat on them, while Smoothie plopped a table in the center of them. Smoothie sitting down on a crate she found for herself, and sitting with a barrel of juice next to her. So, who won the first round? Luffy. Oh, good job lil bro. She nodded at his general location, while Luffy grinned back thanks. As the cards were reshuffled, with Custard cutting the deck this time, they proceeded towards the second round, but before Cracker could flick the cards towards his siblings. Boy, you four playing right now. Of all time, the 5 siblings turned their heads towards a grinning Snack, who had Baverwa and Katakuri behind him. Their boss is dead, so we are killing time with cards, not betting on anything too, Cracker reported, as his 3 brothers approached him. Got room for 2 more. Snack grinned while pointing at himself, and towards Baverwa behind, who took his gloves off while smirking. Sure, why not, just sit your ass down next to them. We start with snack, and end with Baverwa now, Cracker announced, while both brothers were sitting across from each other. Katakuri walked towards Smoothie, who looked on with legs crossed while sipping her drink. Smoothie. Who's that guy over there? The elder brother pointed towards an unconscious Hank, slumped down on the wall with a cracked wall above him. Someone that Mama might have used for. Katakuri just simply hummed in acknowledgement as he gazed towards his siblings playing cards, many of them having mixed facial reactions towards the hands they were given with. Saturday game night practice. Saturday game night practice. Smoothie nodded in confirmation as they both gazed onwards. Both siblings enjoyed the silent solace of each other's presence, although Smoothie noticed the glances Katakuri was shooting at Luffy, while subconsciously reaching for his scarf, which made her frown at his worries. Even though it was a short time spent with Luffy, I know little bro wouldn't give a shit about your teeth. He would probably have flowers spewing from his mouth about them, and you two know that, don't you? Smoothie leaned forward, as her head slumped against her hand, as she gazed at her brother. Katakuri sighed, as he dropped his hand that was clenched on his scarf. The only people Katakuri has shown his teeth to, and explained why he hid them, were the older siblings, along with his triplet brothers, the sweet commanders, and Mama. I know, but it isn't that easy for me. Smoothie. Never will be after what happened to Burley. I must keep up this image no matter what. I can't fail anyone else, even if it was once. Smoothie sighed, but didn't push her older brother, respecting his decision and wishes, but she still prays for the day to whatever deity to give Katakuri a break. One day, big brother, one day you can be yourself without self-scrutiny about your weakness, about your failure. She sighed sadly, but held hope for the day Katakuri could smile freely at the dining table amongst their family. And, as she gazes onwards to Luffy, she smiled. And maybe that day won't be so far off. Where's Mama and the rest, by the way? They should have come by now. Smoothie tilted her head while the brother answered about their absence. I intercepted them mid-slaughter, more specifically, Mama along with our baby siblings with a handful of older and younger siblings accompanying them. Raisin stumbled across their warehouse, and they all decided to go see, and loot for all it's worth, not knowing about the others, though Smoothie hummed at Katakuri's report, now understanding why most of them were late, but that doesn't excuse the rest though. Do you think Mama has fully gotten over it and moved on? Doubt it. It's hard to overcome such grief, guilt, and self-hatred that easily, but Luffy helped tremendously in getting her out of her gloomy mindset, and our mother is strong. She will get over it. We just need to be there for her. Smoothie said while genuinely smiling. Katakuri hummed in agreement. Time shall heal those wounds. Smoothie nodded at that, as they continued watching onwards, as their siblings gambled on. Cracker groaned when he went past 21, which of the siblings chuckling at his bad luck for this round. Damn, if this is my luck on Saturday night, I'm fuck, he muttered under his breath, while shivering internally at that thought, as he collected his siblings' cards, and reshuffled again. As he flicked the cards towards his siblings, he looked at his hand, and grinned a bit. Blackjack. He flipped his hand to show the ace and king he had while his siblings shrugged and flicked their cards towards him, all except Luffy, who grinned and flipped his hand. Me too. To reveal the same hand as his. Cracker twitched his eye, but nodded in acknowledgement. Okay, he was starting to see how lucky his little brother was. 10 minutes later, round 11. Oh hey. Blackjack. What the fuck is this? Cracker muttered, as his eye twitched heavily while gasping in disbelief. Currently, some of the siblings had arrived, majority taking a seat on the table to play along, while the rest just spectated. How many times has he hit blackjack? Amanda asked curiously while sipping a glass of wine, as she and her quadruplet sisters sat next to Smoothie, who was sipping her own glass, along with sitting with her own triplet sisters. 5, along with getting 5 cards under 21 3 times, which is its equivalent, Smoothie said, keeping tabs, as she leaned forward impressed by the absurd luck she was witnessing. Must be real fun for casinos when he comes knocking around, Hachi commented, smirking, as she watched Cracker trying to process how this was possible. If this was a real game, Luffy would be a billionaire, Cinnamon mused, as she looked at her siblings around the table playing, just staring at their brother who just beamed brightly, as if he didn't perform some kind of godly miracle with the luck he had in this game. Speaking of gambling, why are you playing with them, Amanda? Even if it's practice without money on the line, out of all of us, you're one of the top 5 in the family who is an absolute degenerate gambler. Eflor asked, as she sat on the grass, drinking a bottle of whiskey before spitting it out, as Amanda smacked her head while huffing. Because unlike Cracker, Oven, and the others, I know when to cut my losses. And also, I would rather watch Oven's eventual eruption. The man pointed towards Oven, who was fuming, as he looked at his shit hands, his devil fruit reacting towards his anger, as the temperature around him became warmer. But he cooled off when Nefuki bonked his head with armament hockey with an annoyed grunt. But during the last Saturday night, you kept betting all in 4 times in a row. Eflor was once again swiftly bonked on her head, this time with a man using the hilt of a sheathed shiro. And I won them all. Still doesn't change the fact that I know when to cut. My man still kept her poker face, but there was a certain edge towards it, which of the siblings around her sweat dropping. Right, Eflor sweated heavily, as she rubbed her head, soothing the pain. Though, finally Baverwa sighed, placing his hand down, as the siblings first looked at him before looking at where he was gazing off to. Mom, along with the rest of their siblings, slowly came walking towards them with putting it the lead with flame behind her, rubbing her head while whistling, as she avoided facing them. Eventually putting awkwardly just stood in front of her siblings around the table gambling, as she waved awkwardly towards them. Hey everyone, having fun yeah? The stuttering had either given them confusion as to why she was acting like this or set alarms off their head, concerned about what happened. The most vocal of the latter being Luffy, who immediately stood up and walked towards Pudding worried. What's wrong? Why are you acting weird? She started twiddling her fingers, not finding the courage to face her brother, which caused him to tilt his head. Katakuri pinched his nose and sighed. I may have eaten a devil fruit by accident. Luffy blinked, as he didn't see what the big fuss was about. The rest of the siblings on the other hand, what? Yeah, it took a while for me to finish writing. Right now exams are kind of coming up, so I need to study, and all that. Anyway, here's a canonomic. The lion reunites with the snake. Citizens of Sabati. This is Vice Admiral Momonga speaking. Currently there is a catastrophic threat heading this way. We have several temporary evac ships docked at the harbor. Please proceed in an orderly manner towards the ports, where you will be further instructed on what to do. If you unfortunately cannot do this, then please find a building to stay inside, and make sure to never take a peek outside until the threat is officially clear. A sigh came from out of the speakers, as the Vice Admiral sounded grim, but held determination in his voice. We understand most of you will doubt our forces are able to deal with the threat after that shameful display at Marineford, but please believe in us, and the admirals. We are currently doing the best, as we can to uphold justice for the sake of peace. We promise that you will be able to come back to your homes in one piece. Shaki huffed out smoke, as she sat outside on a lawn chair while smoking a cig, listening to the announcement that was followed by regular people frantically running towards her left side, as they were advised. The screams of despair echoed loudly, which had her sighing. But she ultimately did what she was told, well the second part anyway, folding up the chair, and heading inside, and closing up shop until whatever threat was cleared. She sighed, taking out the cancer stick out of her mouth, and extinguishing it before kicking back behind her counter. Knock knock. She narrowed her eyes, and slowly stood up, as she stared at the door. Sorry, but the bar's closed for today. Even for little Almi. She stilled at the familiar voice before she cracked a smile. She walked up to the door, and opened it to be met with Shiki, who was grinning madly while getting a good look at her before scoffing. You haven't aged a fucking bit, you wretched snake. Then Aturally, and what is it I see? The angry little lion is starting to lose its mane. Shaki grinned wider, as he fumed at the reminder of the fact that he was balding. Both pirates continued staring down at each other, before Shaki couldn't hold up the facade, snorting which set off Shaki, who giggled before they both devolved into full-blown laughter and amusement. Good to see you kicking around Shiki. Same for you, Shaki. They shook hands, as they both genuinely smiled at each other before Shaki retracted, and went to her fridge behind the counter. Do you need a drink? Bourbon if you got the stuff, Shaki hummed, as she grabbed it. She didn't even bother to get a glass, just tossing the entire bottle towards her former comrade, who caught it effortlessly before she grabbed a bottle for herself, and sat across Shiki, who sat on a stool. So, you're the catastrophic threat? She mused, as Shiki huffed, taking a big swig. Why else would they sound such an alarm? Good point, but how are you out of Impel Down? Shaki snorted before giving her the general rundown of what went down in Impel Down, to which she snorted in turn. Just like how they covered up what we Rock's pirates did to those kingdoms from the public eye. Shaki mused, as the gold lion snorted. Pretty much. Both former crewmates just sat there in silence before the atmosphere became gloomy, mostly due to the negative energy radiating from Shaki. So Edward Shaki looked down, as he inspected the brand with a frown on his face. Eddie-chan knew his time was coming. He wanted to end it with a bang, while getting his son safely out, especially Ace. She kept her smile on her face, but her eyes spun a different tale. Out with the old, and in with the new, huh? Shaki gazed at the ceiling, his expression hard to read, as it was neutral, while Shaki looked on before throwing her own thoughts about it. We are getting old, my friend. People change over time. Even Lin-chan mellowed out, became a proper mother to her children. Shiki, who choked hard on his alcohol before looking at Shaki in disbelief. Linlin the same, Charlotte. All children are my tools, and are born for my own benefits. Linlin. Shaki nodded in amusement, as Shaki slumped down, still unable to process this into his head. Barely came across her children who told him about her well-being. Imagine my own surprise hearing the news of her turning a new leaf for their sake. And how Luffy-chan was her son, to which she left out. She would let Shiki find out by himself about that fact. Time truly has passed. At least those brats of hers are being raised better. Unlike us in our childhoods. Shiki bitterly smiled at that before taking a swig. Shaki gave her own sad smile, as she looked down a bit. We all were truly the black sheep among our respective people, weren't we? Shiki grinned, knocking his bottle on hers, which got her attention. At least we didn't live a boring life, desperately trying to fit into a society that gives us the finger in our attempts. That shit got lame real quick, so we gave them our own finger, and banded together under a shitty captain given the chance. Shaki giggled at that. Indeed, I wouldn't have been happily engaged towards my dear husband if I didn't join our little crazy crew of misfits. Oh, you're married. Good full wait, you let someone get laid with you. Shaki's eyes comically popped out of his skull, as the sentence finally registered fully in his brain, while Shaki chuckled, and shook her head at her friend's way with words. Indeed, it's not surprising that I'm engaged with Rayleigh. Wait, this explains a lot. Shaki rubbed his chins, reminiscing on the many moments where their crew and Rogers would clash, and how Shaki and Rogers' first mate tend to fight off in a desolate place. Well, that's what Shaki said when she came back after the fight ended, along with a huge smile on her face for some reason. No wounds nor scars on her body to boot. How she for some reason gets really close to Rayleigh whenever they clash for both crews to see, but both crews silently agreed to just ignore and keep fighting who was in front of them. Where's Rayleigh anyway? Shaki blinked as he looked around while Shaki placed her bottle down after a swig, not bothering to hide anything. His off-training Luffy-chan observation Hockey Shaki raised an eyebrow. That brat again, and for Shaki to add chan to their names at the end, indicates trust towards the individual. I heard of that brat from the newspapers. Fucked up the Marines really good, especially neutering the red dog, and making it his bitch, right? Shaki grinned sinisterly, while Shaki giggled. That's the Straw Hat Luffy that you have been hearing about in the newspaper, alright. He even has me rooting for him personally, TOO. Now I'm more interested in him. The gold lion huffed while Shaki snorted before grabbing a piece of paper and writing on it, slipping the note towards Shaki, who stared at the paper in confusion before she explained. You can find Luffy-chan around this island, but Shaki clasped Shaki's right hand before directly staring into his soul, her eyes resembling a snake gazing at its prey, which even had him sweating. Try not to do anything funny, especially towards my beloved, yeah. Shaki chan. I would happily walk to my grave if I were to do that. Shaki let go, and went back to her calm smile, as Shaki took deep breaths. Damn, Shaki might be weaker than him, but she still could decently kick his ass. Do your best to keep your PROMISC. Shaki simply nodded at her advice, seemingly seeing an end to the conversation, but before he left. Oh yeah, take this. Oh? Shaki looked at the den mushi that Shaki took out from his kimono. I'm planning to get all of us rocks pirates that are still alive together at his grave, a last drink with our buddy, you down? Shaki widened her eyes before she huffed. It seems, time has also changed you to SHIKI, she teased, which had him huffing, still waiting for a response before she nodded. Of course, he was a good guy that you could get along with. But Shaki simply said before standing up, drinking the last bit of bourbon, and tossing it into the trash can. Oh yeah, I'm also gonna give the Marines a bigger headache too. Shaki blinked at this random announcement that came kind of last second. That's so? Yup, and how are you going to do that? Educate everyone in this new generation about you. Shaki blinked before she smiled, although it felt and looked sharper. Sure, why not? A little history lesson about what we did in our youth to the public, wouldn't HURT? The whole family was riding on Zeus right now. Big Mom was just humming to herself, feeling the night breeze, while sometimes awkwardly taking a short glance towards her children, who were also doing the same thing save for the humming. Their gazes directed towards a rather embarrassed pudding. They all got whatever they could grab that was valuable or seemed like it, and hopped on Zeus before departing rather quickly than they should have. Zeus working overtime, but could manage, as he expanded and enlarged him. They all agreed that they would talk about the devil fruit pudding ate when they reached back home. It was obviously going to be a very long conversation, along with amusement and teasing afterwards. So, what did you guys even find? We wrapped it up so fast that we didn't hear what you guys looted from the warehouse. Oven asked with arms crossed while looking towards his siblings who took part in looting it. Aside from body parts and cold storage, Piro, they got a pretty decent haul of berries and gold, along with stuff that I no doubt those snobby rich nobles outside our territory would probably buy at a high price at an auction. And we got another sibling with devil fruit powers, Piro. Sparrow slowly turned his head as he mentioned the last thing they found. Pudding squirmed a bit from the simultaneous stares being shot at her for a few seconds. Compet nodded along before taking a piece of cloth out of her pocket with a serious look on her face. Along with this logo I found on a table, it was surrounded by crates that were loaded with weapons and ammunition. Big Mom took interest in what brand they traded or stole from, leaning forward and lowering her hand out, to which Compet placed a piece of cloth in her open palm, the giant mother bringing it close to her face for her to see clearly. She clenched her hand and scoffed before tossing it down on top of Zeus-like letter, which had all her siblings scurrying around it to take a look. It's one of that ungrateful brat's underlings. Everyone recognized the logo. His presence and reputation in the New World was hard to ignore. Luffy tilted his head towards the logo in confusion, vaguely remembering that one guy at the auction with a similar symbol on his jacket, except a line crossed the skull, and there wasn't anything protruding from it. Lord, that guy worked under Kaido. Luffy said in slight disbelief before pouting. He could have told me about it. Lord. Cracker, who was sitting across from Luffy, narrowed his eyes with arms crossed, head tilting in confusion while rubbing his head, which was going through his memories. Was he some fresh new recruit that the Heavenly Demon recruited? He wasn't the only one confused with how his siblings showed their own signs of confusion over this guy. Who's this brat you are talking about? Big Mom narrowed her eyes. She kept tabs on that particular brat and his family with how he climbed rapidly in the underworld, alongside a drug dealer that was slowly but surely overtaking Peklo, who stated his worries once over a tea party about the guy. Apparently his new competitor's supply has been given a 5-star rating from very satisfied and happy customer who had held quite the reputation. Rumors even say an admiral has directly met the dealer himself in person and made some transactions. Only reason she refused to do business with that man was because of her sheer spite towards his connections with Kaido. If it was any other Yonkou or powerful group that the Dunkwixi family were affiliated with, she would have put an effort in trying to get him to favor her side. Met him in Sabati in the auction. He can do this cool thing where he can create this blue sphere thing around him. He sliced some dudes and reattached their bodies in the wrong way. By any chance, does this man have tattoos on his fingers that spell out EATH? Snack asked, to which Luffy beamed in turn, which was enough of an answer. Yeah, that guy. Trafalgar Law is probably what he meant, Smoothie said, saying out loud what was on most siblings' minds, which had all of them snorting while many others sighed, but nodded in acceptance. That was butchered beyond belief. That's not how you say his name, it's Trafalgar Law. Cracker said, squatting down in front of Luffy, who nodded with a smile. Terragor Law. They snorted louder, poor smacking her hand over her mouth, and giggling a bit. It's hard for them not to crack a smile over the utter confidence their brother had in pronouncing a very butchered name. Trafalgar Law. Torfalgar Lore. Many followed what their sister did, while some were quietly letting it out, most prominent being Broy and Broly. Big Mom couldn't help but crack a smile. It was nice to have a spark of childish innocence in this harsh, cruel world sometimes. They kept on going for a good minute. The more he butchered, the more hilarious they found it. Damn it. It's Trafalgar Law. Cracker took many huffs trying to die down his own laughing fit, but couldn't hide his grin that kept widening on in amusement. Luffy once again beamed, except the bulb above his head shined brighter, as if he finally connected the dots. Trafalgar Law. They weren't so quiet about their amusement anymore. Luffy even copied Cracker's stutter. They just couldn't add proper English pronunciation for complex words to the list of things to teach him, before he PFFT butchers more, no matter how hilarious it is. Gillette said through a small giggle fit while slightly smacking Montour's shoulder, who dutifully noted it down, albeit a bit wobbly, as he was silently wheezing. After a minute, they collected their calm, and went back to the topic in hand, although many silently agreed to share the names of more notorious pirates to him, just for pure amusement in him butchering them to high hell. Their logos sure are similar, but the only people that particular warlord allows for people to use his Jolly Roger freely are people part of his family, allies, or some superfan maybe. Baverwash shruggingly proposed a possibility which seemed likely. Get a hold of our regular informants to keep eyes and ears open if they encounter or get anything about that brat. He might turn out to be interesting later on. Big Mom said, following her gut instincts. Her eldest acknowledged it. Of course, Mama Pear Sparrow bowed his head slightly while tipping his head down, feeling a similar gut feeling about Trafalgar Law too. Meanwhile, Smithy patted his little brother's shoulder and shook her head. No, we aren't talking about Law, we are talking about Doflamingo. Luffy looked at that before tilting his head, another question forming. Who's that guy? Smoothie blinked before crossing her arms and huffing with a neutral look. A pretty strong and infamous warlord, especially in the underworld where he became a rather influential broker quite quickly under the codename Joker, while also running the kingdom of Dressrosa as its king. He's in an alliance with the Yonko Kaido that is unbeknownst to the world except for pirates like us. That heavenly demon is dealing and trading something we aren't particularly sure of towards Wano through meet-up points. He even struck a deal with the 1st Division commander of the Whitebeard Pirates to get some experienced veteran nurses to tend towards his former captain to combat against his worsening health. Snack added, on to which Smoothie hummed that too. Luffy just nodded, not really getting much except that he was strong and was working with someone who was on par with Shanks. I see, he did not. Smoothie simply hummed at that before joining her triplets and gazing at the skies along with most of the siblings. The stars sure are bright for tonight. She commented to particularly no one while the siblings around her agreed internally. Why not go stargazing on top of the chateau one night? I can get the servants to clear up the place, Big Mom offered to her children, to which a few nodded, most prominent being Angel and Broy. Shishishi. If you guys want to stare at the skies, you should do it around autumn. The stars are the brightest during that time. Oh? You enjoy watching the stars at night too? Broy asked, inching towards Luffy, who chuckled with a nostalgic look on his face. Amazing, right? It's always either a tall place or an edge of the cliff where you can stare at the stars shining their brightest until you fall asleep. Although I prefer if it was in autumn, that's when they truly shine their brightest. She added on. You also do this with Shanks and his crew. Yeah. Although it's hard to find an island with people that will accept us docking on their port because we are pirates, those cowards. Yuta pouted. Both future Pirate King and Diva lay down on a patch of grass as the night skies glowed, Yuta raising his hands towards the moon with an open grasp with an ambitious look in her eyes. One day, I will reach my new genesis, she softly muttered, as her eyes glowed while Luffy grinned. Shishishi. And I will become king of the pirates. As a fellow SCR, I will reach my dreams before you. No way. Yes way. No way. Yes way. Both children twitched their eyes as they stood up and butted heads, saying the same thing on their minds simultaneously towards each other. Oh, it's on. Yeah. It's even more fun with people though. Luffy gave a bright grin. Eventually, Toto Land came into view with the multiple islands that made up the archipelago, having multiple lights shining from lamps and windows alike, as there still were crowds of people wandering around. Big Mom gazed proudly at the empire she had built, although she still wasn't finished with it, not by a long shot. There still were problems, most of them being her own doing, but she has undone some of them. The rest will take time though, but she will eventually reach her goal of change. But for now, she just wanted to be with her children. The moment they were all going to be together won't last long. Everyone has their appointed duties, as ministers of the surrounding islands, even if they have people that oversee their duties for them. Her children's presence was important, and she will savor every single moment when she can be with everyone. As they reached the rooftops, Tamago simply awaited them along with a few chess soldiers on standby. As they landed, Big Mom stepped off from Zeus and approached him. Status report. Nothing strange nor noteworthy happened in your absence, Bone. But Big Mom simply nodded. Take everything off from Zeus and place them in the treasury. We will sort them out tomorrow. Yes, Mama. Tamago commanded, and lead the chess soldiers on taking the multiple bags of loot, and once they do, Tamago led them downstairs, presumably towards the treasury. Alright, Mozart and Marnier, be a diary, and take your baby siblings to bed, would you? Join back for the talk though. Yes, Mama. The twins guided them downstairs too. You know, I feel kind of sleepy too, so Emma. Pudding froze like a statue, as marble, and Maple simply put a hand on both of her shoulders while shaking their heads. She was not getting out of this one. Sorry Pudding, but you can't hide it from family now, can you Peroy? Especially since I had a good chunk of berries on it happening. Pear Sparrow said internally with a grin, as he stared at Zakato, who immediately understood what the eldest was thinking, and simply just scoffed, and flipped him off once he saw Mozart along with Marnier, escorting the younger siblings out of sight. Is it really that big of a deal? Luffy asked while tilting his head at them with arms crossed. It might not be for you, but it is for us, especially since it's the first in a family for someone to eat a devil fruit by accident. Zakato grumbled while slipping some bills to Pear Sparrow, while he cackled quietly at his earnings before storing them in his pockets. Montour, go get the devil fruit encyclopedia. Montour simply nodded and headed downwards while Galette and Opera followed along to help search for it. Now, let's go, and wait, Big Mom said while her children wordlessly went downstairs with her ahead of them, heading off towards the middle floor with Flamp dragging Luffy along while walking next to Pudding, the trio walking behind the rest of the family. So, how did you eat the devil fruit by accident anyway? Luffy asked, as Flame let go of him, as he followed behind them, Pudding turning flustered, as she recollected her memories. While Pudding avoided eye contact while twiddling her fingers. Compet, open up the warehouse, would you dear? Of course, Mama. Compet happily beamed, as she simply reeled her hand back, and punched a hole clean through the thick shutter doors, pulling her hand back along with the door, as she then pulled it out of her hand, and tossed the shutter doors aside. You know, I sometimes forget she can easily erase our existence with a single punch, as she slipped up her restrained Daku said, sweat dropping, as he glanced at the shutter door that Compet ripped off. It was clearly heavy duty once you get a good look of how thick it was. Agreed, Marnier said next to him. Compet was a pretty gentle woman, hard to anger, and was a bloody good babysitter since her 20s, rarely aggressive, and tends to avoid fighting overall if possible. And she could easily destroy a small fortress by herself if she needed to without the use of haki at all. Anglus, and the rest of his younger siblings just stared in awe at the display at their eldest sister's strength before they stepped inside the place before being followed by their older siblings. Big Mom simply leaned forward with bent knees, moving her body under the entrance and into the warehouse. She had to keep her knees bent to maneuver around the place properly, without bumping her head on the roof, which would be annoying, so she simply raised her hands up, ripped the rooftop off, and tossed it aside like Compet except on a larger scale. Their children looked at her before shrugging, as they started to crack open the crates. It was like any other warehouse, a lot of store contents with shelves upon shelves holding them. There was also a large cold storage that took up 1/3 of the place, and it was pretty obvious what was inside, considering what their enemy was profiting from. As they wandered around, Pudding came across a weird cardboard box in the corner of a shelf. It looked like the rest, save for the fact that it was entirely pink, along with a giant logo which was a cupcake with cartoonish eyes and arms, spray-painted. All have stickers plastered on their external surfaces that displayed its contents, but this one just had some cartoonish food mascot painted onto it. It was out of place. Opening it up just confused her more. The box was completely hollow. There was almost nothing inside, almost. Lying in the bottom, at the center was a lone cupcake, served in a light purple paper cup. The cake itself was an ominous dark purple, and was topped off with rainbow-colored sprinkles. Its texture seemed fluffy and soft, but what was up with the weird swirls around it? It resembled something akin to an ice cream swirl, but each layer had strange line patterns on them. Maybe it was just for a decorative touch. She reached down and held the cupcake by his paper cup and gave it a closer look, squinting her eyes and making several faces, as the logical side of her brain was telling her to not eat something from a box that you don't know about, especially when it's from the enemy. But she let her curiosity win, the devil on her shoulder, successfully convincing her to do it, along with running the thoughts of what's the worst that could happen in her head. And so, she did. She took a bite out of the cupcake, taking in the doughy complexion texture before swallowing it, and immediately looked disgusted as she stuck her tongue out. Ugh, this tastes like utter crap. Pudding blanched as she tossed the cupcake away, which caught a lot of her siblings' attention. Sparrow, who had been looking through the contents, uncovering large quantities of gold and diamonds stored inside them, gave a side glance towards his baby sister and grew worried seeing her facial expression. The eldest carefully laid down a gold bar he had been inspecting, as he walked up to Pudding, looking at the cupcake she had thrown away, a bite mark showing proof of her biting a chunk out of it. Must have tasted like absolute shit for her to make such a disgusted face. Here, keep licking until it goes away, Sparrow said, making a piece of candy, as he handed it to Pudding, who gave a grateful nod, and immediately did so. Where did you get that from? He asked, pointing towards the bitten cupcake laying on the ground, to which Pudding immediately just took the box, and gave it to her brother, who inspected it. He squinted his eyes at the seemingly normal box, gazing at the logo to which he couldn't connect to any brand. Maybe they just sucked at cooking. Sparrow's mind kept producing possible reasons until he flipped the box and gazed at the bottom, plastered perfectly in the center of the contents page. 4 egg whites and 100 grams of butter seems normal. So far, Sparrow squinted his eyes as he continued reading aloud the recipe, as Comfit, Brulee, and Broya made their way towards Pudding. What did it taste like? Broya said, tilting her head at Pudding. As she blinked, it must have tasted awful, especially when Pudding's facial expression reminded her of when Brulee ate her devil fruit. Like chewing medical tablets without the water, Pudding said, as she continued desperately to rid the pungent taste that unfortunately graced her mouth with her brother's candy. 120 grams of flour, 4 tablespoons of milk, a slice of the memo no mi, and finally grape jello. Sparrow nodded, as he finished reading the contents, not seeing anything wrong, as he stared at his 3 sisters who had various reactions. Broya's eyes comically widened to the size of dinner plates, as she stared blankly in stunned silence. Brulee's jaw hangs low, as her eyes whitened, while Pudding was the worst. Her facial expression was, as if she witnessed, and saw the horrors of some crazed drug addict who kept shouting in the streets, "All hail the sun," before stripping naked, dousing himself in cooking oil, and proceeding to burn himself alive, as he did some ritualistic dance until he finally died. And everyone agreed to not speak nor recollect of what went down during Katakuri's, Tefuku, and Oven's 17th birthday ever again. The eldest brother blinked, staring at his stunned siblings for a solid 3 seconds, as his brains processed everything, recollecting the ingredients. He read for a minute, until his eyes widened, and looked over the ingredients again, more specifically the second last part. A slice of the memo no miha. I have seen pictures of what devil fruit looks like along with some of our older siblings getting their devil fruits. I should have known something was up with that cupcake when I saw those swirly patterns, Pudding said softly and quietly. She had reflected upon it several times. It's interesting that someone actually tried making food with a devil fruit, Flamp said, looking a bit amused, wondering what the reason behind it was. It probably tasted decent before the devil fruit was added in. So, what even is the devil fruit? Can your body stretch and stuff? Luffy said, poking and pulling on her cheek as they turned a corner. Ow, ow, ow. I don't think so, and besides, that's your power. Pudding huffed as she lightly smacked her brother's hand away and rubbed her cheek as she grumbled a bit. Oh right. Luffy simply nodded before coming up with another idea. Maybe you will like Ace and can be hit without haki. Here, let me take a swing at you. Luffy helpfully offered, not giving Pudding much of a say, as he rolled his shoulder and cracked his shoulders while Pudding gave a nervous smile, backing away with raised open hands. Oh boy, let's not resort to that yet. Kerr, who was the closest to them, and could hear clearly what the 3 were talking about, immediately pulled Luffy by his shoulder away from Pudding, who let out a sigh of relief, and shot a grateful thumbs up towards her older sister. Before she blinked, and looked shocked at her. Wait, what do you mean by yet? Marble, who had been by her fellow long-armed sister's side, rolled her eyes, before she got closer to them, and placed an arm around Luffy and Pudding. Let's figure that out in the meeting room, let Montour get the encyclopedia, and we figure it out from there. She suggested, to which both younger siblings nodded at, with Pudding shaking her head faster than Luffy at the saner option. And then we can try punching her if it turns out she's a Loja. Marble said with a bright smile, something Luffy mimicked, with Pudding blanching in fear as she stared at her sister in disbelief. I'm joking somewhat. She simply shrugged in response towards her sister's worries and fears, which did not calm down her panic at all. Heading inside the room, it was spacious enough for all of them. As they got seated, they just patiently waited for the ones who went to the library to come here. All of them chatted about their achievements of brutality against their enemies, the spoils of war they have uncovered and taken, and many talked about whole other topics instead. After a while, Montor, Galette, and Opera finally came back with a huge book which was humongous to accommodate the size of Big Mom. Montor let the book lean into the wall, as he flipped towards the book's page of contents, which spans at least 20 pages long. The encyclopedia came into existence from generations upon generations of a family line of explorers who scoured over the lands from both the New World and Paradise, documenting all the devil fruits or devil fruit users they have come across. Some descriptions of devil fruits have multiple pages dedicated to their powers. Sadly, the last heir of the family passed away decades ago, due to a severe illness that had deteriorated his health. His last wish was to pass away peacefully on a chair on a cliff, to face the sunset one more time, to which was granted. He died with a serene smile on his face, as his dead open eyes still gazed at the sun going down, in the former land of O'Hare. In honor and recognition of his family's life work, the scholars of the island took all documents of all the devil fruits written down by his family line, and had printed his work into a book thicker than a dictionary. But production was limited, as the government picked wind on this quickly, and swiftly prohibited them from publishing the books to the public, and demanded them to send the copies to them for their own benefits. A total of 50 books were only printed, 20 were burnt and destroyed, 10 books were given to the government and Marines, the scholars lying about the books being all they had printed, and the rest were smuggled or secretly released outside through irregular or shady means. Unfortunately, Linlin snagged a book for herself, and had someone recreate an exact replica, except being built to accommodate her size to read it easier. This book was so damn rare and valuable, it could easily sell for 4.5 billion beeries minimum in the black market. Alright, what devil fruit did you eat? Montor asked, tapping his foot, as he gazed at Pudding, best to figure out what it was before she spoke of how she ate it unintentionally. The memo no me, Pudding said, nodding a bit while all siblings turned their chairs to gaze at the book. Alright, let's see. Montor deduced that it had to be a Paramecia with a name like that, flipping over towards the Paramecia section, as his fingers trailed off the page that listed the fruits in alphabetical order, more specifically in the M section, until his finger finally pointed at it, and he was right on the dot about what type it was. Entry 0158, page 213. Memo no me, Paramecia. With a cough to clear his throat, he began to read out loud. The memo no me is a devil fruit that allows the users to dig into a person's head to pull out their memories. In the form of a movie film in a long strip, their memories of what they saw can be visually seen on this strip. Montor was intrigued, as he continued reading on, already forming several mental images of it. The rest of the siblings were also in a similar state. It was a pretty useful power, saving them time and energy from getting information out of someone besides interrogation or bribery. The older ones, however, Cracker, Oven, Smoothie in particular, stiffened at the thoughts of their memories being exposed, past memories of them being dumbasses in their youths doing some nefarious and blackmail-worthy shit flashed through their heads like a psychological horror film. They all simultaneously shuddered at the thought of a past they thought was buried deeply enough with the corpses of their respective witnesses, along with hush money that reached 7 digits were paid to get people to shut the fuck up. Also, the light will never shine down upon it. But now one of their siblings had the means to incinerate them all to ash, and let their shameful display of their youth be laid bare for all their younger siblings to see. They must not allow Pudding to see what they did when they were younger, no matter what. Anyways, here Montor took out a bookmarker, and smacked it on top of the page with Pudding's name on top of it. If you need to know about what you can do with your devil fruit, just go to this page, and read the full description. It's very in-depth. Thank you, Montney. Montor huffed, and waved off her sister's gratitude, as said sister was beaming brightly at him. Anyway, how did you get your devil fruit? Well, one lengthy recap about how Pudding ate the devil fruit towards the rest later. Ha, that's a unique way to make a cupcake. Smoothie commented, rubbing her chin in thought. Never in her life had she thought about using devil fruits in cooking recipes, especially with how said devil fruits in question taste like shit. Not only that, but there might be more from where that came from, Cinnamon said, as she crossed her arms, leaning back, and gazing absently at the ceiling in thought. She doubted that a cardboard box originally had a single cupcake inside it. Others probably took one from it, and ate it, leaving the last one for Pudding. But still, it was kind of dumb to eat food out of some random cardboard box, especially considering what those guys' business were all about. Could have eaten a cupcake that had pieces of brain, intestines, and eyes in them, Compass scolded, while Pudding face turned green at the god-forsaken mental image that conjured up. Yeah, she can't deny. That sounds worse than accidentally eating a devil fruit. Their mother on the hand was leaning forward, side-glancing at Pear Sparrow, and her more perceptive and smarter children who were probably thinking along the same wavelength. A food company where their foods contained a portion of a devil fruit as part of the ingredients would have made the news for everyone around the world, but yet this was the first time they were hearing about this. They had many ideas about what this mysterious company was, but kept it to themselves for now. Linlin didn't need to say a word, for she could just tell her children would dig into this themselves. A good mystery once in a while was intriguing to solve, so she will allow them to play detective for a while until she steps in. Well then, besides sorting through the spoils of war tomorrow, anything else we should talk about? Brownie asked, yawning into his hand, as his droopy eyes looked at his siblings, wanting to immediately slam into bed and sleep. Is on night duty again? Cracker simply asked. If I remember correctly, Mondi and Hachi counter along with Cadenza, Panna and Raisin, and finally Chiffon and Daquis. Boy, that was yesterday's arrangement, you drunk fuck. Hachi bonks Ikoto's head for that. Ow. Alright, so whose turn is it then? Dela and Cabaletta, Mobile, Maple, and Marble along with Snack and Baverwab, the mentioned ones, simply either hummed in acceptance or groaned in annoyance, but didn't fuss. Everyone had their turn with staying up late till morning, once they reached 18. Alright, if that's all, see you, I'm going to bed. Brownie stood up, slid his chair in, and just walked off, some following him immediately, while the rest lagged behind. Except for Pear Sparrow and Big Mom, who sat in the comfortable silence once Compet, the last sibling, left, closing the door behind them. Pear Sparrow sighed, as he leaned back into his chair while Big Mom grabbed a wine bottle. She tended to hide under her table to pour herself and her son a drink. My son suspects Big Mom, once she finished pouring 2 teacups, drank directly from the bottle. Unfortunately, they are reality. Pear Sparrow sighed, withdrawing his hat from his head, placing his hand inside to dig out massive pictures he had rolled up inside the hat, rolling them out, and placing them on the table, to which Linlin leaned forward to grab and inspect, her face looking dark as she did so. Our undercover spies spent some time carefully navigating away from Marineford before they made contact with us. The infiltration was a success, and we got what we were looking for. Big Mom hummed at that. All high-ranking Marines took part of the war on the field, leaving only the station guards in the base. It was a perfect time for anyone to break in, have a search around, and take pictures of their findings. As Linlin gazed at the picture, she gritted her teeth as she glared venomously at the picture, while her eldest drank from his teacup of wine. The picture was shot at a bird's eye view, probably taken from standing on top of a chair to take an aerial shot of below, that below being a table with bounty spread out on it. Charlotte Anglis, wanted dead or alive, 50 million. Charlotte Wafers, wanted dead or alive, 50 million. Charlotte Wero, wanted dead or alive, 50 million. Charlotte D. Chat, wanted dead or alive, 50 million. Charlotte Normand, wanted dead or alive, 50 million. Charlotte Dolce, wanted dead or alive, 50 million. Charlotte Dragey, wanted dead or alive, 50 million. Charlotte Anana, wanted dead or alive, 50 million. Linlin slammed the picture down on the table, her hand going through the table, and suspended above the floor. She retracted it back, leaving a hand-shaped hole onto the fine furniture made from Adam wood. Pear Sparrow flinched at the impact and stared blankly, drinking his wine without looking away, while his mother breathed heavy, forming smoke when she exhaled. Linlin wasn't surprised nor pissed about the bounties on her children. The Marines started doing it after Smoothies, Cinnamons, and Citron's birth, giving a minimum bounty of 50 million when one of her children were discovered. But these were her youngest, starting with Anglis at 12 years old all the way to Anana at 6. Her youngest fucking children, who majority of their lives stayed on Whole Cake Island, hidden away from the world, their existence only being known once reaching 13. The only exception were the ones who attended her tea parties. Pear Sparrow, compile a list of all previous guests and attendees of all my tea parties. I want them after a week, she commanded. Yes, Mama, he nodded with his own glare, which was directed downwards onto the floor, as he tipped his hat, brain already going at work, as memories flashed through his head of all people he had talked to. The eldest took his leave with determined eyes to find the damn snitch who leaked his baby siblings' existence towards those self-righteous fucks, placing a target on their backs. Big Mom sighed, leaning back, as she stared at the ceiling. Couldn't be Morgan's, no matter how much she liked publishing big news, even he had standards, and avoided posting information about her children. Couldn't be Drog Peklo, Dufeld, Giberson nor Umid. They feared and respected her, and they don't really stand to gain much from it, except an execution performed by herself. But Stussy, Big Mom sighed, recalling her time with that woman when they were the Rocks Pirates. She was all over Edward, wanted to get a child from him, but the man couldn't give much of a fuck towards her. Actually, he didn't give a fucking towards her at all. She always lightly sulked about the rejection, always walking up to the nearest woman to drink with, Linlin herself being no exception, which normally ends in them, including herself, being naked under the sheets with a bad hangover with Edward's biggest crush. Some days there were more women in bed with Stussy, after getting hammered so hard from drinking with the woman. After they disbanded, she lost contact with her for a while, maybe a decade before she came into contact with her, and came to a business arrangement with her. But Miss Buckingham felt off. She talked, behaved, and walked like Stussy. She still talked about Edward, but talked about him like he was a dead boyfriend, before he actually passed away. She also held her strength when they partook in a friendly spar for old time's sake. Her moves were still all there, a couple of new ones also introduced, but didn't give off the right vibe. Those moves didn't give off ones invented by themselves, and hung to the best of the moves' capabilities. The new moves Stussy displayed, it felt militaristic, as if practiced, and trained by another more professional individual. As Big Mom pondered and pondered, she rubbed her forehead in irritation. She wanted to write Stussy the suspect list she conjured in her head, but her gut instincts prevented her from doing so. Stussy, what happened to you after that bastard died? AN, holy fucking shit, exams were rough, but I passed so that's neat. But there is a second exam around the start of the new year which isn't so neat. Then to be honest, school was rough, deadass literally killed all motivation, and hopefully the second year of school will be easier so I can write more of this. I deadass lost the plot of my own story now, currently writing reminders, and notes now for situations like this to remember shit, was fine remembering until shit happens. Anyways, here's a canonomic. Golden Lion against the Red Dog. This is Vice Admiral Bastille, reporting from Interceptor Ship Number 1. We have confirmed visuals of the Golden Lion ship flying in the air. All interceptor ships are in defensive formation. The distance between our fleet and target is roughly around 15 kilometers. Any signs of the man himself on the deck? No. What are your orders? Sail back to Sabati while firing at his ship. Don't end the call, and report for any changes. Yes. Akainu sat down, as he heard the sounds of cannons being fired from the Den Mushi. Currently he had majority of the naval warships anchored near the shorelines of Sabati, all fully broadside, and ready to rain hell upon his ship upon entering firing range. It won't kill Shiki, but at least it will somewhat shake the bastard a bit. 5 vice admirals on 5 small, agile, and fast ships were ordered to sail further outwards to get first sightings of his vessel, and perform what was essentially a naval run and gun. The main forces were scattered strategically around the shipyard and tourist zone of Sabati in which he should come from. Makeshift defensive positions were set up all around Grove 40 to 59, in which he should come from. The Marine headquarters in Grove 60 to 69 had all their cannons turned towards the 2 islands direction. The firepower and barrel length should be good enough to hit him from afar once he comes into effective range. And then there was himself, who was situated around Grove 45, the fleet admiral standing between the 2 sections of Sabati, as he prepared himself for Shiki's arrival. Sir, is this a good idea? Akainu gave a side glance towards the approaching vice admiral, a man who had an X-shaped scar on his face, his eyes closed for he is blind, while his weapon was strapped to his waist. Vice Admiral Fujitora, are you challenging my authority? Akainu questioned. He was a part of many that came from the world military draft plan that he himself held, the call to arms against pirates. After the Marineford disaster, their forces were severely diminished, which was why this draft was held. Fortunately, their manpower had increased drastically thanks to this decision, but that was probably because Akainu had spent a good chunk of the world government's increased funding on the Human Resources Department, increasing overall pay, and added benefits, and bonuses to lure more people in, and boost general morale, even if it's low. A lot of good people had come towards them. Majority of them were seasoned soldiers from different kingdoms, along with ordinary citizens, tired of pirates rampaging through the seas. Many allocated to what suits them best, and Akainu couldn't help but feel glad that majority of these people were suited for combat-related positions. And luckily Fujitora along with another person excelled greatly in this field. Both rapidly climbed the ranks in the Marines. They will easily become the 2 new admirals of the Navy with their potential. That's the question. Sir Akainu glanced back at the ocean, as he smoked away in thought. No, the logical thing to do is evacuate everyone out of here, and let the Golden Lion pass by, the fleet admiral admitted. Against someone like Shiki, it was like a natural disaster. It was best to stay clear from it, and let it pass. Then why? Because if we did nothing, then who will? If the Navy were to just simply stand back, and do nothing, we will be considered more of a joke than we already are. Akainu scowled. The Marines had taken a large blow from the War of the Best, loss of trust among the public and kingdoms, along with the pirates becoming more bolder. It was an absolute shit show that he was getting under control still. Many good people are going to get injured and killed. Fujitora muttered with a deep frown, but accepted this fact. Nothing he can do will change it. Consider first-hand experience of what's to come, and what to expect. To uphold justice is to carry the weight of the world against all who oppose it. Akainu said, as he looked onwards towards the seas with arms crossed. We must end this confrontation quickly, Fujitora simply said. Now that's something we can both agree on. Oh? Then get on with it. Both Akainu and Fujitora tensed up, the atmosphere turning dreadful in an instant. As they quickly turned around, the sudden feeling of a malicious presence behind them was instant. Walking towards them from a distance, releasing Conqueror's haki that knocked out all the weaker Navy soldiers around him was Shiki, grinning with his 2 swords unsheathed and in his hands. So, you're the new fleet admiral, huh? Of course, the government would select you of all people. Shiki sighed in disappointment while Akainu clenched his fist before relaxing it. I see, you were never on your ship. You came here with your devil fruit powers yourself. For what purpose have you come here personally, you bastard? The fleet admiral already had smoke coming out of him, as his body glowed of magma. Can't you let an old man explore the world, and see what the new generation is like? Also, thinking fast he let go of his swords which rapidly launched towards 2 unconscious soldiers. Fujitora sprang into action, immediately dashing to one of the soldiers to parry the sword away. But much to Shiki's surprise, he was bewildered by the fate of the other unconscious soldier. There stood Akainu in front of the lying soldier, who smacked his katana away, instead of taking the opportunity to launch himself towards Shiki who left himself unarmed. Ha, even a leash dog changed during my imprisonment, Shiki muttered in curiosity, as he retracted his katanas away from the admirals, and back to his hands. My go dark, hound. Shiki leaped backwards, away from a charging Akainu who had turned his hands into pure magma. But the spite still burns brightly, Shiki mused. He floated in the air, as he reeled one of his hands back, gripping hard on his katana. Menkenshoku/Eclipse, he released a large ellipse-shaped blade of air that appeared golden, aiming for the top of their bodies, but more specifically towards the blind man. Fujitora simply leaped out of the way while Akainu took the hit, the blade of air going through his magma body, which quickly reconnected. But Shiki didn't let up, as he charged towards Fujitora, clashing blades with him, starting a conversation with him. Using observation haki to see, I presume. Shiki casually said, as he looked at the admiral's eyes that were opened a bit. They were completely whitened out. Indeed, Isso admitted. But yet you can hold yourself quite well, impressively. YTH Shiki kicked Fujitora in his torso to launch him back, as the lion himself leaped away, pressing his foot against the ground hard to forcefully launch himself away, as Akainu blasted magma from where they previously stood, irritation shone clear on his face. Stop casually talking towards our enemies, and fight. Sakazuki scowled, his entire right side covered in magma with the other half being normal, so he could clench the den mushi. With a click off a tongue, Shiki dug his foot onto the ground before kicking the dirt up. Cracks quickly formed from where he had kicked, which quickly made its way to Akainu before it exploded underneath him, rocks bursting out and hitting him, but they simply went through his body. Holes were formed, but quickly closed with magma. Akainu, despite being unaffected by a weak attack, simply clicked his tongue, as his vision was obscured by the rocks, along with the dust that came with it, using observation haki too late, as he felt pain radiating from his back, as he was sent flying towards. Shiki looked disappointed, as he placed his foot back to the ground after delivering a haki-imbued kick towards Akainu's back. After all these years in prison, you Marines are improving powers in the wrong areas, Shiki huffed, as he calmly walked to Akainu, who quickly got back on his feet. Seriously, after the golden era with monstrous legends like Garp and Roger were seen as the strongest, had the Marines been turning a blind eye to what they should be more reliant on and working on? Here, let me show you what you fools are severely lacking in. Digging his feet to the ground to the point cracks formed before he launched himself, kicking up the soil, as he reeled his fist back and punched Akainu hard in the stomach. The fleet admiral coughed blood, but quickly gritted his teeth as he attempted to wrap an arm around Shiki's waist and burn this old fucker alive, but the golden lion simply kicked him away before he could, and created distance between them. As Shiki touched the ground, his body suddenly became heavy. The ground around him gritted his teeth as he felt the pressure. What is this? Shiki looked at Akainu before looking at Fujitora, who was walking up to him with his sword slightly out of his sheath. It had to be that blind man's devil fruit power at play. Your execution. Akainu reeled his fit back, prepared to repay him kindly for those hits he had given him, but, as he swung, Shiki simply stopped resisting the amplified gravity, letting his body fully slam into the ground, narrowly avoiding the magma from touching his face. As he lay down on the ground, he forced himself to roll to the sides before droplets of magma, dripping from Akainu's still magnified arm, could melt through his back. Shiki felt the gravity becoming normal, as he rolled out, able to stand up without any pressure now, as he saw the cracks from the ground form which he laid, and stood on continuing to crack further and further. Only affecting areas, no, anything within a radius similar to my own fruit. Shiki's brain theorized that, as he got his grip again, he started leaping and dodging immediately, as craters formed from where he previously had stood. It was abrupt and instantaneous. That blind man's devil fruit was the opposite of his. He could strip away gravity, while that navy dog amplified it, ranging towards an extreme degree in less than a second to boot. He finally leaped to the air, but floated instead of landing. He rolled his shoulders before looking down at Akainu and Fujitora, both men facing him. Shishiudashi lion menaced. The ground shook, as giant pieces of soil busted out from the ground. The unconscious soldiers that laid around were knocked up in the air, from the sudden explosion of dirt that broke the ground beneath them, that made its way towards Shiki. The chunks of earth headed to the skies, and floated right above his head. Pieces of it broke away throughout its ascension, slowly sculpting, and shaping itself into a lion's head with a scowl on his face. He pointed Kagurashi towards them along with the 5 lion heads, smug, an arrogant grin on his face, getting back to the swing of things after being chained down in prison for so long. It was a good way to get his bearings back in the new world, using these admirals as a warm-up. Shishiudashi. Hayaku no Kibu lion menace. 100 fangs sharply constructed spikes of dirt rained down upon the 2 admirals, along with any unconscious marine around them. Moko. Raging tiger. Raisei Kaizen. Meteor volcano. In return, Akainu launched multiple giant magma chunks that resembled its fist, colliding with the spikes to stop it, while Fujitora reeled his katana back before slashing, the spikes slowing down, before coming to a complete halt in the direction of his swing before being pushed back and blown away to a dirty mist of soil. The lion heads didn't let up on the barrage, but they became smaller and smaller until they were just the size of Shiki's torso. Alright, not bad, then how about this? Maintaining his grin with a glint in his eyes, Shiki raised his hand. The small iron heads crumbled into dust, and were sucked in like a black hole towards an ever-expanding orb above Shiki's open palm. It took shape, as he conjured one single massive lion head, which, along with his hand, lowered, and faced the admirals. It was similar to a hand cannon. He placed his hands on the back of its soil head, the color changing from dirt to a blackish clay which made Akainu tense, while Fujitora furrowed his eyebrows. Armament Haki. The Vice Admiral muttered while Akainu widened his eyes, reaching the conclusion of what was coming almost too late. Shishiadashi. Ohagura no Raiju. Lion Menace. Black teeth of the beast. Hundreds of smaller, but faster spikes came descending down towards them, the major difference being the color, which was noticeable dark. Fujitora tried to use his devil fruit, but had to dodge before he even had the chance to conjure his strength. He found himself on the defensive, as he kept on parrying or dodging the lethal projectiles. Daifunka. Great Eruption. Akainu was releasing forth a great burst of lava to try and halt the movements, but the tip of the spikes still was able to reach him, majority poking into his clothes, but some were able to pierce through his skin, making him grit his teeth as he bled from it. The onslaught of Haki-imbued spikes pushed them back, anything in its path obliterated. The trees turned to Swiss cheese, some collapsing form having too many holes, while others unfortunately found themselves a more fleshy target, in the form of the still unconscious Marine soldiers. The very lucky simply were grazed, the less, but still lucky had a quick and swift death, as their heads turned to fine mist with a spike as its replacement, while others had an unceremonious wake-up call to reality before dying from shock, as the spikes pierced through their internal organs, breaking multiple ribs and bones, along with the unfortunate ones getting dismembered. Akainu, throughout this ordeal, finally erupted in great rage. Benugami Gurin. Dog-biting Crimson Lotus. From the lava Akainu spurted forth, out came a fanged dog head of magma that rapidly shot towards Shiki, while the man himself was taken aback by his ferocious attack. It was the size of a fucking galleon, and the length of a sea beast. Shiki reeled his hand away from his cannon, and rapidly flew out of range, as the dog had bit on his construct, the thing returning back to regular magma which plummeted down towards the ground along with it. I really pissed himself. Shiki chuckled humorously before smacking his hand onto his face, sliding it down to his chin in thought before grinning, one which screamed bloodthirst. Yeah, time to kick things up a notch. 3 days had flown by after the battle with the organ harvesters. Toto Land was no longer being targeted, for now. There were bound to be more idiots that think they could take them on, as such a pathetic little organization thought that they could. But for now, they can relax and chill, run their operations normally, while Luffy continues on with his training with Rayleigh. Currently, said Rubberman laid in a crater painting with Rayleigh standing over him with a wooden stick sling over his back. Fallen trees surrounded them, along with Cracker who was sitting on a stump. The sweet general, out of his biscuit armor, came to see the progress along with just being genuinely bored without anything assigned to him, and wanted to see something entertaining or interesting, so he decided to come and babysit his brother for entertainment. He couldn't help but sweat drop at the sight of his little brother's training that he will be going through for a couple of months, shivering at every impact delivered by the former right-hand man of the Pirate King towards the top of Luffy's head throughout the day. If it were him, he would have dropped and rolled around the floor, screaming in pain. 24 hits dodged now. Think you can make that 25 in a row? The old man teased while Luffy gritted his teeth. The young captain's improvement was still pretty rapid, but every 5th hit or so rarely changed things up by either concealing his presence more, attacking faster and more aggressively than usual, and etc., making sure the Rubberman would adapt. Forcing his body to stand back up, his stance back in the offensive, as Rayleigh didn't waste time and charged at him. Cracker couldn't help but lean forward and take mental notes of Rayleigh's words of advice that he threw to Luffy as he continued dodging and making distance from himself and Rayleigh. Some advice from an experienced old man such as himself could also help him train his own observation haki further after he comes back to Toto Land with Luffy, but Cracker doubts that he himself would get to Katakuri's level, no matter how much he trained. Luffy on the other hand, had massive potential for power. He sailed for a couple of months, and already had a fucking bounty bigger than some in the New World. Definitely a world record, couple that with Rayleigh's training. The seas will be fucking stirring, and the skies bring a storm upon his return, and reunion with his crew. Focus on the intent of an attack, that is the hint Cracker muttered, repeating the old man's words he kept conveying to Luffy. It was something the right-hand man commonly said to him throughout training. He and his siblings' observation haki training was similar to Rayleigh's, a blindfold, and another person taking a swing at you, except the more Cracker and his sibling progressed in training observation haki, the more people would be added to try and hit you too. Sometimes fearful animals, along with homies specially made by Mama, would be added into the mix. And it was his first time in his years of piracy, hearing such simple words that accurately described how to improve or get observation haki. Although he couldn't ponder more of it, as Cracker leaned back quickly, narrowly avoiding a stray rubbery fist that nearly knocked him the fuck out, but instead put a crater into a tree, as he retracted it back. Hey. Watch where you're aiming that thing. The sweet general rubbed his chin that was almost grazed by his brother. Ah. Sorrow. The comical bonk sounded, as Rayleigh landed a hit on Luffy's head, adding another bump to the stack of bumps on top of his head. Focus on the fight. An enemy won't give a second thought on attacking you when you let your guard down. Pirates aren't honorable fighters. Rayleigh said, an amused smile on his face, as he looked down at Luffy before he looked at Cracker. Despite you being here for a while now, I can't seem to recognize you from the bounty posters related to your family at all. Are you perhaps a Charlotte the Marines don't know about? Cracker snorted, understanding his confusion. Oh no, you probably heard about me. The name's Cracker. Seeing the immediate raised eyebrows of Rayleigh, he clapped his hands, conjuring the head of his biscuit armor which he juggled with one hand. I'm normally in an armor made with my devil fruit. Only time I walk around without wearing it is either in my house at the Whole Cake Chateau. Everyone besides my family think I look like this guy, he chuckled, as he stopped juggling, and threw the head behind him, as Rayleigh let out an "oh," as he absorbed that piece of information. That must be useful, being able to travel around normally without being linked to your bounty poster. Cracker nodded in agreement with Rayleigh at that. Just need a change in clothing, hairstyle, and nobody would bat an eye. Rayleigh nodded at that. It wouldn't hurt to be cautious. The clothes stand out like a sore thumb heavily, along with his hair that somehow had sparks at the end, which Rayleigh didn't bother to question. It was the least weird thing he had seen around the seas where the impossible is pretty much possible. As Rayleigh continued on training Luffy, he was just almost breaking his record of dodging 24 consecutive hits, but could barely dodge the 25th. The strike was getting closer and closer to a mere graze, but the stick still made contact with his head, but he was almost dodging it. The training ended once it was evening, time to head back for dinner. Well, that's it for today. Once you break your record on another day, it will be easier to dodge, Rayleigh complimented while Luffy groaned, lying on the ground, as he rolled over, and bowed his head to the old man who huffed, but felt warm. Seeing someone be this grateful towards a person who beating the living shit out of him for the purpose of training, was a tad bit amusing. Thanks. No problem. Now go off with your older brother, and back to your mother, Rayleigh said, waving him off, as Cracker approached his brother, slumping Luffy's arm around his shoulder, as he dragged his ass towards the mirror, and stood in front, waiting for her sister to come, and use her devil fruit powers to open the gateway back to home territory. But not without looking back at Rayleigh, expression neutral if you ignore the maniacal grin on his face. Why not come with us, and have dinner with Mama? She doesn't hold grudges against you for what you and your crew did. I think the sweet general shrugged. Sure, maybe she was still slightly annoyed with how the Dark King got rubbings of Mama's poneglyph, but she would be less pissed about him, considering he was training her son right. I could get my little sister Bruley to secretly sneak you back here if Mama is still pissed about what you did. Cracker quickly added on while Rayleigh rubbed his chin, facing a little downwards, as he pondered on the offer, before shrugging. The 2 previous days, 3 different siblings came with him. Sometimes they gave more details about Luffy's abduction from Toto Land, Linland's current status, and just generally how they were doing. But all asked him the same thing. Yesterday, it was 2 young girls going by Flame and Pudding, and the day before that, it was an older man going by Oven. It would be rude to turn down an invitation to a dinner a 3rd time, wouldn't it? So, with an amused smile, he chuckled a bit, as he accepted the dinner invitation this time around. Sure, I wonder how much Toto Land has changed after so many years. Cracker huffed, grinning wider. Good, it was a Saturday, today, and tomorrow would be the last time all of them could be gathered at once before Monday arrived, and they eventually sailed back towards the islands they respectfully govern. No doubt his siblings would be curious about the former right-hand man of Roger, an old pirate always got a shitload of stories to tell. After a minute, Bruley's head popped out of the mirror, facing a severely beaten and exhausted Luffy being carried by Cracker with Rayleigh standing beside them. She huffed before retracing her head back, which was their cue to enter. Stepping into the mirror world, Rayleigh examined his surroundings, an endless place that seemed to stretch endlessly with mirrors everywhere. So this is what the mirror world looks like. As Bruley heard the mutters of Rayleigh, she widened her eyes at him before looking at Cracker, who simply nodded back at her, which made the end of her lips twitch upwards. It's something straight out of a fairy tale, isn't it? Bruley teased, as she stepped forward, circling around Cracker, as she looked at Luffy, and shrugging, giving Cracker her diagnosis. Luffy is alright, just needs some food, and rest to prepare for tomorrow's training. Cracker simply nodded at that before they all continued moving forward. Meat, I want to eat it. Cracker rolled his eyes while Bruley scoffed. He had been whining non-stop about it for a while now. Don't worry, Mama finally got a hold with a company willing to ship it days ago. They arrived while you were training, and are being prepared by the chefs. As we speak, Luffy's head shot up, face beaming, as he shrugged off Cracker's grasp on him, much to the older man's surprise. But none were more surprised, and taken off guard, than Bruley. Luffy ran ahead of the group, as if his energy was magically restored, mouth forming into a ravenous grin, and pupils turning into meat on a bone. He reeled his hand back, and wrapped around Bruley's waist, the older woman blinking a couple of times, before realizing a little too late to make a comment. Come on. Let's go, Branch. He launched his free arm forward, letting it stretch until he felt something, and latched onto it, and let his body be pulled forwards along with his arm retracting back along with Broly in his hold. "My name's Broly." Her screams slowly became quieter the further she went with Luffy. The two men were left in the dust, the Charlotte facepumped, while Silvers just stared. "We should probably quicken up at our own pace." Agreed. A man stood guard at the mirror that led to the dining room, Shiro sheathed, and on her waist, as she leaned on a wall, arms crossed without a cigarette in her mouth, to not ruin her taste buds for dinner. She pushed her body off the wall, hand hovering above sword. Her poker face remained intact, but she couldn't help but notice the two familiar approaching presences darting towards her with observation haki. What worried her was the speed they were going at. Eventually, she was able to see them visually, as she squinted her eyes. Her right one twitched violently at the sight of a grinning Luffy carrying Broly like a sack of potatoes, the woman shaking violently, probably to get out of her little brother's grasp. "Boy, let go of me. You ran off without the others." "Oh? Right." Luffy nodded while Broly sighed in relief, thinking her brother would finally let go of her. But that hope shattered like glass, as Luffy simply turned around and sped off again, this time to get the other two. "Big sister man. Help me," said tall neck woman simply just stared before sighing, as she sauntered, trying to catch up with her brother. She couldn't help but let a small smile escape onto her lips, as she did, amusement rolling off her eyes. Well, at least things aren't boring with him around. Oh? So instead of letting that sea monster go after snarling at you guys, Roger actually dived into the ocean, and tried to stab it by swimming towards it, while waving his sword around. To be fair, we were drunk on our ass, so we weren't thinking straight at the time. Should have seen Crocus, didn't hesitate to dive after him, grabbing several harpoons to throw at the poor beast. More and more people joined our captain in the cold waters, trying to kill a single sea monster. Pretty sure that big fish had tears in its eyes when they continued stabbing it, before they finally finished it off. Cracker blinked before nodding, letting out a ha at that fact. To think the crew of the Pirate King were chill like that. Where were you in all that madness? Being the responsible drunkard, just in case the ship drifted away from everyone or the unforeseen happened, I stayed on deck. Tom, the man who built our ship, would have killed us if we actually lost the Oro Jackson like that. Should have seen Shanks when he was still a brat, despite being the one of the two sober ones, because we only allowed man to drink. He tried diving into the oceans too. I managed to grab him by the collar of his shirt, and I might have given him a headbutt, but I can't remember. The memories become blurry after that. Barely sighed, nostalgic about all the migraines and headaches he got with his crew. Sounds like your time, as a part of your crew, was chaotic as hell. Charlotte commented. It was, and it's where my happiest moments were born, and forever ingrained into my memory. Cracker kept silent. The eyes on Rayleigh strongly reminded him of the days when Mama would stare blankly out into the sky seldomly, as if lost in thought or memory, before someone snapped her out of it. "Oh, seems like he came back." Cracker blinked at Rayleigh's facial expression becoming a bit brighter, confusion on his face, before he felt what Silvers was feeling, as he gazed in the same direction as he did. "Ha, wonder why, with how fast he ran off. He should have reached Big Sissa Man by now," Cracker muttered, as he squinted his eyes. Luffy came to a screeching halt, just stopping a foot away from them, as he grins at them. Come on. Branch, my name is Broly. Said there will be meat. Meat. I haven't eaten meat for 3 days already, and I need it." Luffy whined. "Sheesh, you're insatiable for that, aren't you?" Cracker huffed, as he pried Luffy's arm open in the moment, letting Broly drop to the floor much to her relief, as she stood up, and dusted her clothes. Upon being freed from her little brother's hold, she didn't hesitate to lightly flick his forehead, making him dramatically whip his head back, putting his head over the place where she flicked his head, while Broly had her hands on her hips, looking down like a bemused mother. "Geez, you don't know a thing about tact, don't you?" "What's that?" "Food. Let's just go eat." "What is this?" "The menu of tonight's dinner's course, Sir Oven." The chefs are simply jumping with joy at the fact that we are cooking up a meat-based dish for today. Oven raised an eyebrow, but shrugged. The cook just simply came in with these papers containing the list of what they will be served for dinner, and the chef might as well be on whatever Kazari was on with how unnaturally happy he was about it. Quite an extensive list Oven used, going over everything. He was one of the few who tasted meat before, but that was long ago. After Toto Land's formation, he only ate whatever he could bake, which was mostly sandwiches, baked potatoes, and apple pie. Yes, we cooked up a variety of meat-based dishes, maybe too much. The chef admitted sheepishly, but he made sure to keep out the fact that they cooked extra food for themselves to enjoy. They hadn't had the taste of chicken, pork, beef, and fish ever since they came here, and they were sure the Charlottes wouldn't notice. Hopefully. He wanted to try a bowl of fucking chicken nuggets with ketchup dipping sauce again after so long. Once he excuses himself back to the kitchen, he was going to savor that shit. The table was full of dish covers, concealing the appearance and fragrance of their dinner, while they all had different shapes of cups and glasses, filled with soda, wine, cola, tea, and whatever beverage they desired. Katakuri, unlike most of his siblings who were looking at the stainless steel covers on the table, simply kept his gaze at the large mirror hanged on the wall. His eyes glowed red momentarily before they went back to normal. He huffed, smirking underneath his scarf, as he gazed at the mirror with newfound interest in the future he saw. It's been a while since they had a guest. They are coming. Finally, Montdor muttered, interested in a couple of dishes that had cheese in their name. We are back. Luffy was the first to bust out of the mirror, looking happier than usual. Someone probably told him that dinner will be meat-based, which is why he was in a good mood. Welcome home, Master Luffy. A chef who stood nearby greeted him well bound with the boy himself just simply waving along with a yo. All servants in the chateau were all sworn to secrecy about the existence and return of Charlotte Linland's 36th son, especially after the Charlottes made an example out of a person who simply questioned what would happen if they did. Made forced to watch the man tossed off a cliff with his legs and arms bound by shackles, along with a rope tied around his torso connected to a boulder, was quite the strong enforcement for them to shut the fuck up about this matter, and they will happily oblige. Cracker, a man followed behind, and the chef greeted them all the same, but the next person made the chef shriek as he stepped back. "Ho, isn't this quite a fancy dining room?" At the unfamiliar voice, everyone turned their heads towards the old man popping out from the mirror, and reacted immediately. Everybody knew who he was, despite his hair being longer and completely white. There was no mistaking that he was Silver's Rayleigh, former right-hand man of Gold Roger. Some were relaxed, but many others were still tense, not worried about the Dark King being a possible threat, but rather because of Mama's former spite for the old man's crew. "You haven't changed at all, Linlin." Rayleigh mused. His face was all smiles with a friendly demeanor, but his hands twitched, ever so slightly, ready to grab his blade to go on the defensive in a moment's notice. But he relaxed, as tensions eased in the room, as Yunko laughed without any maliciousness in her tone. "And you changed a lot. Let's agree to bury the past. It was a long time ago, no point in holding a meager grudge." With that sentence, Rayleigh couldn't help but whiten his eyes slightly at that, but quickly reverted back to his neutral face. She really mellowed out a lot as she considers that a meager grudge, and it was just from seeing a newborn smile. Rayleigh gave a side glance towards the boy in question. The corner of his lips couldn't help but point upwards, as he thought about another baby, except him, and his crew found him from a treasure chest. "Yeah, there's no doubt, you picked good on who to give that straw hat to, right, you damn red-haired brat." Agreed. Rayleigh nodded. Like dominoes, everyone relaxed, shoulders slumped with a few even letting out a sigh of relief, but the attention was still on him. He just stood there, as he watched Amand, Broly, Cracker, and finally Luffy move to their seats. Upon seeing the rubber boy sit down, he seemed to be conversing with those same two young girls that visited him, along with another taller boy with a smile on his face. He should probably sit with them. It's always good to sit with people you know. So, he just simply grabbed the nearest chair near him, and walked towards them, working a circle around the room till he reached them, and sat down between Luffy and the other person. "Don't mind me. Don't sweat it, you." Yun reassured Rayleigh, as he moved his chair for the man to sit between him and his brother. "You sure do have a lot of siblings," Luffy-kun Rayleigh mused, internally sweat dropping, as he looked around him. It's been a while since he had many people stare at him in recognition. He could eyes some who he had seen in the newspaper along with their bounties, but majority of them were unknown to him. Yun and Luffy laughed at Rayleigh's comments. "Yeah. In total, including Luffy and you, there's 86 children, 47 brothers, and 39 sisters. Shishishi, I can't wait to tell Ace and Sabo about you guys." "Yeah. Go ahead, you sworn siblings are also ours to you." Yun gave the thumbs up to Luffy, who responded with a wide grin, unaware about the majority of the older siblings, including their mama's thoughts about that. Yeah, they needed to address and discuss that later, push that for the future selves. Present selves just wanted to enjoy dinner. "You sure seem to have gotten along with your siblings quite quickly," Luffy Rayleigh mused, making the young boy laugh again. "Alright. Without further ado, please enjoy your dinner." The chef excused himself out of the dining room, leaving the family alone. He sure left in a hurry. Tefuku huffed before focusing on the dish covers, as everyone started pulling them off, revealing the plates. The fragrance hit them harder than any armament hockey users could ever accomplish. It was alien to the majority of them, but the rare few were nostalgic about this old, but recognizable smell before the formation of Toto Land. The smell was violent in its impact, unforgiving for their nostrils, as they took in its fragrance, which was enhanced by its seasoning. There were plates of popcorn chicken, chicken nugget, and fried chicken, jerk chicken, steak fingers, hot dogs, turkey leg, Salisbury steak, butter kimchi, several slabs of different steaks stack up on one another, sashimi, crab legs, lobster with butter dipping sauce, beef tenderloin Wellington, colladits, burger sandwiches, pizza with meat, sushi with salmon, and various slices of fish, BBQ skewers, spaghetti with meatballs, ramen with beef pork chicken, grilled brisket, bacon-wrapped dates, satay sticks, shepherd's pie, pork loin, stew, chicken tikka, burritos, quesadilla, shish kebab, stew with different meats in them, ham turkey slices, meatloaf. And finally, the simple, but a favorite for Luffy's, meat on a bone, specifically, sea king meat. Overall, it made them incredibly insatiable for the taste of it, to sink their teeth into it, and have a taste. The first one to do that was Luffy, who happily grabbed the bone, and started chewing barbarically. Smoothie followed next, grabbing a barbec skewer, and eating with delight, as all followed, hands outstretched to grab different food from the plates. Delicious. Damn, this is good. Rayleigh looked amused, as he ate slices of ham and turkey, along with a couple pieces of beef Wellington while gazing at Luffy. The plate of meat on the bone was placed in front of him instead of being scattered around the tables like the rest which was left up for grabs. Not only that, the portions were bigger, probably cooked for him, so he would only focus on it, rather than the others. He wonders how many times he stole food from his siblings until they came up with the solution for this day of dining. Your chefs did well, you must pay them high if you eat like this every day. Linlin snorted at Rayleigh's compliment. A chef working for her were one of the most well-paying jobs in Toto Land, but they went above what she paid them for. A bonus was probably in check for their hard work. She will just grab a handful of gold straight from the treasury and toss it to them. Let them split it amongst themselves. Naturally, they are cooking for all of us. Any human who could single-handedly feed me or one of my children alone earn my respect. Linlin said with pride, as she devoured the slabs of steak on a plate. Understandable. I see half of where Luffy's appetite comes from, Rayleigh mused. The other half of where that black hole of a stomach was inherited from was towards Garp. He wasn't sure if Dragon inherited that big appetite trait from his father or not, but it was highly plausible, considering he was the Navy hero's son. Katakuri took great interest in it. It was a type of pie made from the dough used for donuts, mixed with meat in it. He hummed, using the same trick he used when eating around his family without showcasing his mouth, intensely concentrating on the pie, and devouring it at the speed of light, his head motionless, while a good chunk of the food disappeared, leaving only bite marks, which was proof of him eating it. Good. Katakuri hummed in approval at the taste well oven, and Ifuku just deadpanned at him for a solid 5 seconds before they continued eating on. The snake-neck quadruplets in particular were ravenous. A man in particular was devouring food at almost the same speed as Luffy, the woman gulping different foods, finding the seafood most enjoyable. It took 10 minutes before everyone cleared the table, many degrees of satisfaction plastered on their face, Luffy being the brightest. Well, that was fulfilling, Herr Sparrow hummed, licking his lips to clear any leftover crumbs on his mouth, while Compet nodded alongside him. To think you eat like this every day, I'm quite envious of you, LOLFFY, Rayleigh said with an amused smile at the younger boy who simply laughed at that. Alright, Big Mom clasped her hand, looking down towards all her children, getting their attention. Do you mind leaving me with this old man so we can converse for a bit? The siblings looked at each other, nodding at one another before one by one they all left, Yoon dragging Luffy out along with him, shooting a glance at his brother who kept staring at Rayleigh, and their mother, just staring at each other. Rayleigh broke the silence once the doors clicked. So, what do you want to discuss with me, Big Mom? Linlin huffed, drinking from her wine glass that was half full. Don't worry, it's just a simple question. Rayleigh queried an eyebrow, but nodded. Go on. Are you actually married to Shaki-chan? Yes, I am, happily so. Ha, so all those times you both clashed back when she and I were still a part of Rocks, you both were actually flirting? Yes, we were. Ha, Big Mom blinked, before reaching from behind her, towards a drawer, a flower vase at the corner, along with various den mushes at his side. She grabbed the furthest left one, and placed the snail phone on the table, and simply dialed. Pure. Rayleigh blinked, seeing the expression of Big Mom's eyes narrowed with a shit-eating grin on her face, while waiting for the other end to pick up. It was as if she hit the lottery. Who are you calling? Give me a moment. Good evening, this is the captain of the Beast Pirates Kaido. How would you like to fucking die? Brat. It's been a while. Ha. Old hag, what the fuck do you want? You now not only owe me for saving your fucking ass at God Valley. You now also owe me 100,000 berries, you ungrateful son of a bitch. Thanks for watching my video, and make sure to check out the author of this fanfic. Link is in the description. See you next time. Till then, sayonara.